Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The moment I met Jane, it was like the world paused, just for a second, to make sure I took notice. I remember the exact way her smile lit up the corner of the room at that trade fair, like she wasn't just standing under the lights but was commanding them. I'd walked in that day expecting another series of endless conversations about market trends and investment opportunities. I didn't expect her. She was different from anyone I'd ever met, confident without being arrogant, charming but grounded. Jane Foster didn't just have a seat at the table. She owned the damn room without even trying. She had this knack for seeing right through my polished exterior, the one I've perfected after years in investment banking. She didn't care about my title or my success. She cared about me, Franklin Richards, the guy who trips over his words when he's nervous and secretly loves cheesy romantic comedies. Our condo in New York City feels like the life I've always dreamed of, modern, sleek, a little piece of calm in the chaos of Manhattan. But what really makes it home is Jane. She's the one who insisted on adding plants to our living room, even though I swore I'd kill them in a week. Spoiler, they're thriving because she keeps them alive, not me. She brings life to every space she's in. We've been planning the wedding, and every detail feels surreal. In just a few months, I'll be marrying the woman who challenges me, inspires me, and somehow, against all odds, puts up with me. Sometimes I look at her across the table, her brow furrowed as she sips her coffee and pores over some new project for work, and I have to remind myself that this isn't a dream. She's real. She chose me. I still wonder what I did to deserve someone like Jane. She's fiercely independent, insanely talented, and God, she's beautiful. But more than anything, she's the reason I look forward to coming home at the end of a grueling day. And soon, she'll be the reason I say I do and promise her forever. She's it for me. My beginning, my middle, my end. At least that is what I believed, or that is what I had in my mind. Things started to change the moment Laura walked back into Jane's life. I didn't even know Jane had a childhood friend living in Germany until she showed up one evening with a bottle of Riesling and a smirk that made my stomach churn. I wanted to be polite. I really did. For Jane's sake. But from the first words out of Laura's mouth, it was clear. She didn't like me, and I sure as hell didn't like her. She didn't waste any time digging her claws in, making snide remarks about my job, the condo, even the way I held Jane's hand. "You're lucky Jane's so patient," she said once with a condescending grin, like she was daring me to bite back. And believe me, I wanted to. But I knew Jane wouldn't appreciate me losing my temper. Instead, I stayed calm, outsmarting her at every turn. Her digs never landed, and the satisfaction of watching her squirm when I outworded her was almost worth the frustration of her presence. But Laura wasn't just a nuisance. She was a problem. Jane started to change around her. She'd laugh off Laura's comments about how she didn't need a man, or how she could do better than me. At first, I thought it was harmless, just two friends joking around. But then Jane began questioning things about us, about me. Little things at first, like whether I was too controlling about the wedding plans, then bigger things, like whether she needed to find herself before settling down. I could see what was happening. Laura was a bad influence, plain and simple. She didn't believe in relationships, at least not the kind Jane and I had. Laura was the type to glorify independence to the point of isolation, and she was pulling Jane in with her cynicism disguised as empowerment. It wasn't fine with me. I loved Jane, and I knew we were good together. I wasn't some controlling partner trying to clip her wings. I wanted to build a life with her, one where we both thrived. But Laura? She was planting seeds of doubt in Jane's mind, and it was tearing us apart. There were moments when I almost lost it. Once, after one too many of her passive-aggressive jabs in my house, I stood up, fists clenched, and told her she needed to leave. Jane stepped in before I could finish, pleading with me to calm down. "She's my friend, Franklin," she said, her voice trembling. "Why can't you just get along?" It stung because I knew why. I wasn't the issue here, Laura was. But Jane couldn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to. It was causing cracks in our relationship, cracks I didn't know how to fix. Every argument about Laura left us more distant, and every day she stayed in our lives felt like a step further away from the life Jane and I had planned. I could feel her slipping through my fingers, and the worst part? It felt like there was nothing I could do about it. The tension had been simmering for weeks, but when Laura proposed the girls' only trip to Europe a month before the wedding, it felt like someone had dropped a match into a room filled with gasoline. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. Laura, the very person who had been driving a wedge between Jane and me, now wanted to whisk her away right before we were supposed to commit to spending our lives together? It wasn't just disrespectful, it was calculated. Absolutely not. I said, trying to stay calm but failing miserably. We're about to get married, Jane. This isn't the time to go on some escapade with her. Laura, of course, jumped at the chance to paint me as the villain. See? This is exactly what I've been telling you, Jane. He's trying to control your life. This is why men are the worst. They suffocate you, clip your wings, and then expect you to thank them for it. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. The nerve of this woman to stand in my home and act like I was some sort of tyrant. I clenched my fists, willing myself to take the high road, but then she said it again. Control. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle to Jane's freedom. That's when I snapped. You know what, Laura? Maybe your dad should have used a rubber when you were conceived, because you're nothing but a walking disaster. The room went silent. Jane's eyes widened in shock, and for a second, even Laura looked stunned. But then she exploded. She started yelling about how I was toxic, how this was exactly what she'd been warning Jane about, and how no woman deserved to be treated like this. Jane tried to step in, her voice shaky. Franklin, that was uncalled for. Laura is my friend, and you? No. I cut her off, my voice firm but cold. You need to listen to me, Jane. Laura isn't just your friend. She's poison. She's been trying to sabotage us from the moment she walked through that door, and if you can't see that by now, then I don't know what to tell you. Jane opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't done. If you go on this trip, Jane, then we're done. I'm serious. I'm not going to marry someone who lets someone like her dictate our relationship. Laura is trash, and you deserve better than to let her drag you down with her. I could see the hurt in Jane's eyes, but at that moment, I didn't care. I was furious, not just at Laura but at Jane too, for not standing up for us, for letting this toxic person plant doubts where there should have been trust. Laura stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Jane just stood there, tears welling up, staring at me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't recognize myself, either. But I'd reached my breaking point, and something had to give. Now, the ball was in Jane's court, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what she was going to do. That night started out tense, as most nights had been lately. Laura, ever the disruptor, had called Jane, inviting her to a club for a night of dancing. I could hear the excitement in Jane's voice as she glanced at me, her eyes pleading for permission she didn't even want to admit she was asking for. I didn't even let her finish. No, I said, my tone flat and unwavering. You know how I feel about her. After everything, you're really considering this? Jane sighed, clearly torn. It's just dancing, Franklin. It's not like we're robbing a bank. She's trying to what? Drive a bigger wedge between us? I snapped. Every time you let her pull you into her nonsense, it's another nail in the coffin of what we're building. The silence was deafening. Jane put her phone down and told Laura she wasn't going. But the look on her face wasn't one of agreement. It was resignation. Laura, of course, went to the club alone. And that's when the fight really started. You can't keep controlling my life, Franklin, Jane yelled, her voice breaking. I stayed home for you tonight, but it's like nothing is ever enough. You just want me to cut everyone out until there's no one left but you. I could feel my anger bubbling over. This isn't about control, Jane. It's about respect. About protecting what we have. But if you can't see that, then maybe we're wasting our time here. Before I could say something I'd regret, I grabbed my jacket and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I needed to clear my head, so I called Jake, my oldest and most dependable friend. He was always the one I turned to when life felt like it was spinning out of control. We met at his place, where he was lounging with a beer in hand and a box of snacks on the table. Rough night? He asked with a knowing smirk as he handed me a drink. You have no idea, I muttered, collapsing onto the couch. Jake, in his usual laid-back way, produced a small bag of mushrooms from his kitchen. Maybe this'll help you chill out. It's been a minute since we had a real adventure, huh? Normally, I'd have refused. But tonight? Tonight, I was tired of thinking, tired of feeling, tired of fighting. So, I shrugged and took one. At first, nothing happened. But then the walls seemed to breathe, the colors in the room pulsing like they were alive. Jake was laughing at something, but his voice echoed like it was coming from another dimension. Suddenly, the weight of my anger and frustration lifted, replaced by this overwhelming sensation of interconnectedness. The dream started so vividly that I didn't even realize it was a dream at first. I was back in the condo, pacing the living room, my mind a whirlwind of anger and frustration. Suddenly, the phone rang. I answered it, and Jane's voice was on the other end, shaking with panic. Franklin, it's Laura. She went to the club, and something terrible happened. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see the scene playing out in my mind. Laura, alone in that club, surrounded by men with cruel intentions. Jane didn't have to say it, but I knew. Laura had been assaulted. When I got to the hospital, Jane was waiting for me. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. But when she saw me, they filled with fury. "This is your fault," she spat. "You made her go alone. If you hadn't been so controlling, she wouldn't have been there by herself." "No," I stammered, shaking my head. "I didn't make her go. This isn't on me." But Jane wasn't listening. "You'll pay for this, Franklin," she said, her voice low and cold. "I'll make sure you regret every single thing you've ever done." Despite the ominous warning, the next part of the dream shifted. Somehow, we still got married. I didn't understand it, but there we were, standing at the altar, saying our vows. For a while, life seemed okay, peaceful, even. The fight stopped. Jane smiled more. We were happy, or so I thought. Then came the day at the hospital. Jane was in labor, and I was by her side, holding her hand, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. When the baby was born, the room fell silent. My heart stopped when I saw the child, a beautiful baby, but undeniably mixed race. I turned to Jane, my face pale. What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jane looked at me, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. And then she laughed. Not the light, musical laugh I'd fallen in love with, but a cold, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome to your new life, Franklin. Your hell has just begun." The next thing I knew, I was back at the condo. On the kitchen counter were divorce papers, already signed by Jane. She'd claimed everything. The condo, the savings, even the investments I'd worked my entire career to build. Attached to the papers was a restraining order. I was being labeled as a domestic abuser. I tried to fight it, but the system was stacked against me. Word spread quickly, and soon, I lost my job. My colleagues avoided me, my friends stopped calling, and my reputation was in ruins. One day, as I sat in the wreckage of what used to be my life, I saw a photo online. Jane and Laura, sitting together on a beach somewhere, smiling. Laura raised a glass to the camera as if to toast my downfall. In that moment, the weight of everything crushed me. I screamed, the sound raw and broken, but no one was there to hear it. And then I woke up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The mushrooms had worn off, and reality came rushing back. It was just a dream, a terrible, twisted nightmare. But the feelings it left behind? Those were real. The anger, the fear, the guilt. I sat there in the dark, wondering if it was a warning. If my worst fears about Laura, about Jane, about everything, weren't just in my head after all. When I got home, the air felt thick, like something was off. And then I saw her, Laura, sitting on my couch, smirking like she owned the place. Jane was in the kitchen, pouring wine, acting like this was completely normal. "Why is she here?" I asked, my voice sharp but controlled. Jane turned, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Laura canceled her plans last night because of everything. So tonight she thought we could hang out. And we decided to go out. Just the two of us." I felt my stomach twist, but instead of letting the anger take over, I smiled. A calm, measured smile that even I didn't expect. "You can go," I said simply. Both Jane and Laura froze, surprised by my reaction. Laura's smirk quickly returned, but there was a flicker of something else. Hesitation, maybe. "Wow," she said, leaning back against the couch. "I guess the boy finally knows his place." I didn't even flinch. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, "but I guess you still need to figure out yours." Her smirk faltered for just a moment, but she covered it up with a laugh. "Whatever," she said, standing up and grabbing her bag. "Come on, Jane. Let's go." Jane looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Approval, maybe? Or doubt. But I didn't give her anything. I just stood there, calm and collected, as they walked out the door. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed in the quiet apartment. I stood there for a moment, the smile fading from my face. Let them have their night, I thought. Let them feel like they've won. Because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to play this game anymore. But that didn't mean I wasn't planning my next move. The call came at midnight, jolting me out of a restless sleep. Jane's father's voice on the other end was frantic and shaky. "Franklin, you need to come to the hospital. It's Jane and Laura." Something happened. I didn't ask questions. I just threw on my clothes and drove like a madman to the hospital. When I arrived, I found Jane's father pacing in the waiting room, his face pale and full of worry. "She's in there," he said, pointing toward one of the rooms. "They're both saying they were assaulted." My stomach churned, but something about his tone made me pause. It wasn't just worry, it was confusion. I stepped into the room, and there they were. Jane, lying on the hospital bed, looking pale and shaken, and Laura, sitting in a chair beside her, her usual smugness replaced with a thin veneer of distress. "Jane," I said, my voice steady, but cold. "What happened?" Jane avoided my gaze, her hands fidgeting with the hospital blanket. Laura, on the other hand, perked up immediately, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "What happened?" "We were attacked, Franklin. This is exactly why I said Jane should never have trusted you. If you had been there—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. I turned to Jane's father, who looked like he was bracing for something. "Mr. Clark, I appreciate your concern, but I'm here to tell you this. The wedding is off. I'll have Jane's clothes packed and sent to your place by morning." Jane's head snapped up, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. "What? Franklin, you can't be serious." Laura jumped to her feet, her outrage immediate. "You're running away because something bad happened to her? You're pathetic." I smiled bitterly, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Oh, I'm not running. I just don't tolerate liars." I tapped the screen a few times and turned the phone toward them. The video played clearly, a security feed from a nearby hotel. It showed Jane and Laura walking arm in arm with a group of men, laughing and flirting as they entered the hotel lobby. An hour later, they emerged, still laughing, and hailed a cab. "According to the doctors," I said, my voice low but cutting, "there's no evidence of any assault. None. And now we both know why." Jane's face went pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Franklin, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted. "You and your best friend cooked up some story because you didn't want to face the consequences of your own actions. But I'm done. I don't marry liars. And I certainly don't marry someone who would disrespect me like this." Laura's face twisted into rage, but before she could say anything, I silenced her with a glare. "You've done enough damage. To Jane. To me. But you won't get another second of my time." I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind the sound of Jane sobbing and Laura sputtering in indignation. By the time I got to my car, I felt an odd sense of relief. It was over. Whatever spell Jane had over me was broken, and I could finally see clearly. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. It had been a few days since I'd walked out of that hospital, leaving Jane and Laura behind. The weight of everything still hung over me, but I was determined to move on. That night, as I walked back to my apartment from a late meeting, I felt the distinct sensation of being followed. I turned a corner into a dimly lit alley. Stupid, I know, but I wanted to confront whoever it was. That's when it happened. A man lunged at me, a knife glinting in his hand. Fortunately for him, I've been a black belt in judo for years, and muscle memory kicked in. With a quick sidestep and a well-placed throw, I disarmed him and pinned him to the ground. He squirmed beneath me, cursing and yelling, but I didn't let up. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice ice-cold. The man hesitated, his face twisting with a mix of anger and shame. "Laura," he spat finally. "She said you ruined her and Jane's life. Told me to teach you a lesson." My grip tightened. "And you agreed to this? Why?" "I'm her lover," he said, his words dripping with defiance. "One of the guys from the hotel that night." "Jane, Laura." "Me? It wasn't what you think, man. We all had fun. Laura she wanted to get back at you after what you pulled." My stomach churned, but I kept my composure. "You have proof of this?" The man smirked, clearly proud of himself. "Hell yeah. I got videos. Figured they might be useful someday." I yanked him to his feet, pushing him against the alley wall. "Show me," I ordered. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his gallery. Sure enough, there they were. Videos of Laura and Jane, laughing and drinking with him and his friends. The images turned more explicit, confirming everything I'd already suspected. I grabbed his phone and sent the files to myself before tossing it back to him. "Get out of my sight," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options, but the look in my eyes must have convinced him. He turned and bolted, leaving me standing alone in the alley, the weight of what I'd just uncovered settling over me. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind raced. I had the proof now, not just of their lies, but of their sheer malice. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. The next morning, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't surprised when I opened it and found Jane standing there, her face a mix of defiance and desperation. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We need to talk," she said sharply. "Make it quick," I replied, leaning against the counter, my expression blank. She took a deep breath and launched into it. "You need to marry me, Franklin. You owe me that." "My child." I cut her off. "Your child?" "Yes," she snapped. "My child needs a father. You may not want to do the right thing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and cold. "Let's not pretend this is about morality, Jane. You're looking for a meal ticket, not a father for your kid. But let's clear one thing up. If you're so sure this is my child, let's get a DNA test." Her face hardened. "No, I'm not subjecting myself or my baby to your ridiculous accusations." "Then I have my answer," I said, pushing off the counter. "There's nothing more to discuss. Get out." Jane's demeanor shifted instantly, her voice dropping into a dangerous tone. "You think you can just walk away from this, Franklin? If you don't marry me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. I'll file assault charges, harassment, abuse, whatever it takes. You might be able to fight the charges, but by the time it's over, your career, your reputation, all gone." I smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that caught her off guard. Without a word, I turned my laptop around so she could see the screen. Her expression changed from anger to confusion, then to horror as the video started to play. There she was, with Laura and the men from the hotel, clear as day, laughing, drinking, and eventually engaging in the kind of behavior she'd been so eager to lie about. You recorded this?" she stammered. "No," I said, my tone calm. "Your boyfriend from that night was happy to share. But there's more." I clicked on another file, and the room was filled with her own voice, threatening me with false charges, spelling out her plan to ruin me if I didn't comply. Jane's face turned white as I opened an email draft on the screen. The files were attached, and the recipients were listed: her employer, her family, and the authorities. "Let me show you how serious I am," I said, my finger hovering over the mouse. With one click, I sent the email, watching as the notification confirmed it had gone through. Jane's hands trembled as she stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. You can't do this." I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. "Get out of here, Jane. Go fight the fire I just lit. And don't ever come near me again." She turned and stumbled out the door, her panic visible in every step. 2 days later, the nightmare I thought I had closed the door on came knocking, literally. Jane and Laura stood at my doorstep, faces set with anger and determination. Against my better judgment, I let them in, if only to avoid them causing a scene in the hallway. "What do you want now?" I asked, folding my arms and leaning against the door. Jane spoke first, her voice strained. "You owe me, Franklin, for the time we spent together, for everything I gave up to be with you." I blinked at her in disbelief before a bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, you? Are you serious? Jane, are you a prostitute now? Because that's the only way this demand makes any sense." Her face flushed with shame, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the old Jane, the one who might have felt remorse or regret. But then she steeled herself. "I deserve something for everything I went through." I shook my head, my patience wearing thin. "You deserve exactly what you've earned, which is nothing from me. Now, both of you need to leave before I call the cops." Laura, as always, couldn't keep her mouth shut. She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You think you're better than us? You're just a spineless man who hides behind his money. If you're not going to give Jane what she deserves, at least help me. I need a loan." That caught me off guard. "A loan? You've got to be kidding me." Laura's tone shifted, desperate now. "I'm in debt to someone dangerous. If I don't pay up, it's my life on the line." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch before replying. "You don't know how to ask, do you?" Her confusion turned to anger. "What? If you want my help, you'll have to learn some humility," I said coldly. Laura hesitated, then slowly dropped to her knees, her face a mixture of fury and humiliation. "Please," she said through gritted teeth, "help me." I leaned down, meeting her eyes with a smirk. "Now you know your place." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a $1 bill, and tossed it onto the floor in front of her. "That's all you're worth. Take it and get out." Jane stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, as Laura's face twisted in rage. She lunged at me, her scream echoing through the room, but I was ready. I had already called the cops when I saw them approaching my door, and right on cue, there was a knock. The officers stepped in, separating Laura from me as she thrashed and shouted obscenities. Jane tried to defend her, but the officers weren't having it. After a brief explanation and a quick review of the security footage from my building, they placed both women in handcuffs. As they were led away, Jane turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a mix of betrayal and despair. "This isn't over, Franklin," she spat. I stood in the doorway, watching as they disappeared down the hall. "Oh, it's over," I muttered to myself, closing the door behind them. For the first time in weeks, my home felt peaceful again. A few days later, as I was heading home, something unexpected caught my attention. A pair of screams pierced the air, sharp and desperate. I turned my head to see two women being dragged by several men toward a car. One of the women, though I couldn't see her clearly at first, screamed Jane's name, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of her voice. "That's my boyfriend. He'll give you the money." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I knew that voice. Without thinking, I stepped closer, trying to make sense of the scene. One of the men turned toward me, his face hardened with menace. "Are you her boyfriend?" he asked, his tone flat but dangerous. I stared at him for a moment, taking in the situation. Then, with a slight shrug, I answered, "Nope, never seen that woman." The man paused, then grinned, as if my response had been the punchline of a joke. "Well, then she's going to pay the right way." With that, they shoved Jane and the other woman into the back of the car, the engine roaring to life. The men climbed in, the car peeling away from the curb in a cloud of exhaust. I stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. I could have done something, maybe. I could have tried to intervene, tried to help, but the truth was, I felt nothing for Jane anymore, and the thought of getting tangled in her mess again made my stomach turn. Turning away from the street, I walked back to my apartment, the sound of the car fading into the distance. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was finally behind me, and I was done being dragged back into it. It was time to move on. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
"Hey, who's that handsome guy?" Both Cindy's husband Jim and their friend Barbara were taken aback by her question, even before they stepped through the backyard gate. Barbara followed Cindy's gaze and spotted a friend of Adam, Cindy's brother-in-law. Just so you know, I'm right here," Jim reminded his wife. "What, can't I admire a good-looking guy when I see one?" she retorted. "Well, if you're going to check out some guy, I'd prefer if you kept it to yourself," Jim responded a bit bluntly before shifting his focus to their host. "Hi, Barb. Sorry about that." Barbara and her husband, Tony, were hosting an outdoor birthday party for their daughter, who had just turned 13. Barbara saw them approaching, but hadn't greeted them yet. She chose to overlook Cindy's question. "No worries, you two. Come on in," she said, still holding the gate. "Where should these go?" Jim asked, holding up a case of beer. "There are a few coolers by the tree filled with ice, Jim. Some have soft drinks for the kids, but the others are for the beer. Just pick an empty one. Gifts go on that table over there," she directed Cindy, who was carrying a nicely wrapped box. Tony, the co-host, spotted them and came over to welcome them. "Hey, welcome, you two," he said, kissing Cindy on the cheek. "Jimbo, let me take that." As he reached for the case, Cindy made another attempt. "Hey, Tony, who's the handsome guy sitting over there with your brother?" Tony, a bit slow to catch on and unaware of the previous conversation, looked where Cindy had gestured. "Oh, his name's Bob something. He works construction with Adam." "Why, do you know him?" "No, but I wouldn't mind," she replied. "I mean, what a hunk." Tony glanced at Jim, surprised. Not fully understanding the situation, he tried to lighten the mood. "Watch out, Jim. Sounds like she's on the prowl," he joked. Jim was just as surprised. It seemed like his wife was trying to make him jealous for some reason, but he didn't want to ruin the party, so he chuckled it off and forced a smile. "Yeah, sounds like she's ready to trade me in for a younger guy." "That'll be the day," Barbara quipped, giving Jim's arm a playful slap. "Well, come on in, you guys," Tony said. "Barb, why don't you show Cindy where to put the gifts?" When Barbara saw the expression on her husband's face, she understood exactly what he was implying. He hoped she would inquire about Cindy's behavior. En route to the gifts table, she lowered her voice to ensure no one else could overhear. "Okay, Cin, what's happening? Did you and Jim have an argument or something?" What do you mean? Don't give me that. We've all been friends for a long time, and I've never heard you speak like that in front of Jim. Something's up. I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He's out all day, flirting with every pretty girl he sees. You know Linda Kingston? Yeah. She saw Jim in a restaurant a few days ago. He obviously didn't notice her. She told me the waitress came over and kissed him. They talked and laughed through lunch, flirting the whole time. Cindy, Jim's a friendly, outgoing guy. That's just his personality. Having a girl kiss you is more than being friendly, Barb. It's crossing a line, and you know it. Tony kissed you on the cheek a minute ago. That's different. We've been friends for years. This is some waitress he flirts with when he goes there. I don't like it, and it definitely doesn't pass the wife test. The wife test? Yeah, you know, guys use it all the time, but for them, it's the husband test. A wife shouldn't do anything in public or private that she wouldn't do in front of her husband. Well, what's good for the goose, as they say. So, you chose my daughter's birthday party to give Jim a hard time? Don't worry, I won't do anything drastic. I wasn't even thinking about it until I saw Adam's friend over there. He's perfect. I just want to teach Jim a lesson. Well, do me a favor and don't start any fights, okay? I won't. Besides, look at that guy. He's built like a tank. Jim would be crazy to mess with him. All right. I see more guests coming up the walk, so I have to go do my meet and greet thing. I'll catch up with you later. Remember, no fights, okay? No fights, Barb, I promise. She glanced around and spotted Jennifer, the guest of honor, chatting with her friends. She decided to go over and wish her a happy birthday. Jim had just finished helping Tony with the beer and had the same idea. They both arrived at the same time. Cindy spoke first. Congrats, honey. You're officially a teenager. You can really give your parents a hard time now, she joked. That goes for me too, Jen, Jim added. The congrats part, I mean. I'm not sure about the giving your folks a hard time part, he teased. Jennifer laughed at Jim's joke. It was well known in their circle that she'd had a crush on him since she was a toddler. Thanks, she replied while giving Cindy a hug and Jim a kiss on the cheek. These are my friends, Coral, Kathy, and Debbie, she introduced. They chatted with Jen and her friends briefly, but Cindy was eager to proceed with her plan to teach Jim a lesson. Hey, sweetie, she addressed the birthday girl. I'm going to go say hi to your uncle. Catch you later. Jim was about to accompany her when he noticed Tony signaling to him. As Cindy began to walk away, he remarked, Behave yourself. She shot him a wicked glance. Approaching Tony, who was still by the coolers, Jim inquired, What's up, buddy? Just wanted to give you a heads up, Barb talked to Cindy. Seems like you've been flirting with some waitress. Cindy caught wind of it and has this idea to teach you a lesson. I'm guessing that's what all this hunk talk is about. Jim pondered for a moment. I have no idea what she's talking about. I haven't flirted with any waitress that I'm aware of. Did she mention where or who supposedly saw me? I'm not sure, she didn't specify, but I think she's planning to use Bob to make you jealous, so try to stay cool, okay? Meanwhile, as Tony and Jim conversed, Cindy approached her target. Hi, Adam. Hey, Cindy, how's it going? All right, I guess. Who's your handsome friend? Adam was taken aback while his friend stood and introduced himself. Hi, I'm Bob. I assume you were talking about me, right? He said with a charming grin. Who else? She replied. Hey, Cindy, Adam interjected. Where's Jim? He's over there chatting with your brother. I'd love one of those, she said, pointing to the beer Bob held. Hey, Adam, why don't you be a gentleman and grab the lady a beer while we get to know each other better? Not wanting to be rude, Adam obliged. As soon as he headed for the coolers, Bob offered Cindy his now vacant seat. As she sat down, she glanced over to see her husband glaring at her. Seeing his reaction only fueled her confidence that her plan was working. She turned to engage in conversation with her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, when Adam reached the coolers, he approached Tony and Jim. Hey, what's up with Cindy? Why, what happened? Jim inquired. She's cozying up to Bob over there. Who's he, anyway? He works with me. We're on that big high-rise downtown. I've known him about 6 months. Seems all right, but he's a bit of a ladies' man, and I wouldn't trust him around women. He didn't bring a date? Jim asked. Nah, it was sort of a last-minute thing. He was supposed to play golf today. We got off work last night around 5, and he got a text canceling. Started complaining about having nothing to do today, so I invited him to the party. At least Jim now understood what his wife was up to, though he wasn't sure how to handle it. He knew Cindy well. Once she got an idea in her head, she wouldn't let it go until she made her point. Ignoring her might push her further, but confronting her might provoke Bob. He aimed to avoid that scenario at all costs. Adam, do me a favor, will you? Just keep an eye on things. Let me know if it starts to get out of hand. Adam acknowledged Jim's instructions and grabbed a cold beer from the cooler before returning to where Bob and Cindy were engaged in conversation. Handing Cindy her beer and pulling up another chair, Adam felt it was time to interject, hoping Bob would catch the hint. He mentioned having seen the pictures Jim took of the lumberyard fire and praised his talent, wondering if Jim planned to enter the press photographers contest again that year. Though slightly annoyed by the interruption, Cindy politely replied that she assumed Jim would participate. She then informed Bob that her husband worked as a photographer for The Tribute and had won several awards at a state contest for press photographers the previous year. Bob responded with a hint of disdain, acknowledging Jim's presence across the room. Cindy confirmed it was indeed Jim, a response delivered with a dismissive tone that didn't go unnoticed by Bob or Adam. Bob shifted the conversation, expressing his enjoyment of working with his hands and constructing enduring structures. He then directed a question to Adam, asking for validation, to which Adam could only respond with agreement. Assuming Bob had effectively shut down the conversation about her husband, Cindy immediately resumed chatting with Bob, essentially excluding Adam from the discussion. He felt foolish. He'd heard Bob use that same line about working with his hands on women in bars before. It always seemed to impress them, and here Adam had unwittingly given Bob an opportunity. Feeling he was doing more damage than good, Adam excused himself to wish his niece happy birthday for what felt like the 20th time. Jim circulated, mingling with the others while closely observing Cindy and her companion. Although none of the men mentioned his wife's interaction with another man, the women began to gossip. Jim overheard Jenny discussing the situation with her friends, mentioning that the man Cindy was with worked as a newspaper photographer. She added that her dad commented on how photographers often find themselves in various challenging situations due to their job. Jenny expressed surprise that Jim hadn't intervened physically. Jim chuckled to himself. It wasn't really Bob's fault, after all. It was his wife's. And as frustrated as he sometimes felt, he'd never resort to violence against her or any other woman. Glancing over, he noticed an empty beer bottle next to Cindy's chair, and another in her hand already. She tended to drink more when she was nervous. This wasn't good. Bob had 3 empty bottles beside his chair. Just then, Tony mentioned that everyone seemed to be getting hungry as he stood by the grill. Jim, preoccupied with Cindy, hadn't even noticed the enticing aroma of grilling meat. Tony then announced the food options available, including burgers, brats, and chicken patties, along with various sides on the nearby table for everyone to help themselves. Jim thought it might be a good opportunity to separate Bob from his wife. Perhaps they could find a quiet corner to eat, and he could learn more about this person he was supposedly flirting with. As he turned toward them, he saw the potential lovebirds setting their beers down beside their chairs and standing up. Apparently, Bob had decided that Cindy was his for the day and possessively took her by the elbow. "Not happening," Jim muttered to himself. He quickly walked over. "Excuse me, could you remove your hand from my wife?" Bob immediately released Cindy's arm and raised both hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Sorry," he half chuckled. "We were just heading to get some food." "Yeah, well, I can handle it from here, thanks," Jim retorted angrily. He grasped Cindy's other elbow and led her over to the food table. "What's gotten into you?" Cindy questioned. "That was incredibly rude." Ignoring his wife's remark, Jim guided her in front of him as they joined the food line. "Grab some food," he stated flatly. "You and I are going to have a talk over by the shed while we eat." Observing the confrontation between Jim and Bob, Adam seized the chance to speak to his colleague, now alone for the first time in a while. "What are you doing?" he asked, irritated. "She's married to one of my brother's closest friends. Leave her alone." "Hey, man, you should be telling her to leave me alone. She's the one hitting on me. I'm just being polite." "Polite, my foot. Seriously, Bob, cut it out. Look, if you think you stand a chance with her, forget it. She's using you to get back at Jim over some waitress. Stay out of it. Listen, married or not, I've never turned down a beautiful woman like that in my life. I know women, and I think you're mistaken about her using me. She's genuinely interested, I can tell. I think you should leave. This is my niece's birthday party, and I don't want any trouble." All right, I'll back off. If she approaches me again, I'll send her right back to her husband, all right? If you don't, you're out of here, Bob. I mean it." "Scout's honor," he responded, holding up the Boy Scout salute. "Now, can I go get something to eat?" "Yeah, go ahead." Cindy wasn't particularly bothered by Jim stepping in between her and Bob. They had only known each other for a few hours, yet he was already becoming overly familiar, not to mention the suggestive comments he was making, although it amused her to see how easily she could manipulate a man like that when she wanted to. Still, she could sense from the way Jim had taken hold of her arm that she had pushed her husband as far as she should. She had promised Barbara no drama, and Jim had proven he wasn't intimidated by Bob's physique. She needed to spend the rest of the day with her husband. She just hoped he had learned his lesson. They both filled their plates with food, and Jim gestured toward the shed, away from the crowd. When they found a quiet spot, he handed Cindy his plate. "Here, hold this while I fetch a couple of chairs. I'll be right back." Despite his anger, Jim remained a gentleman, holding the back of her chair as Cindy sat down. He pulled his own chair alongside so they could talk privately. After a few bites, Jim couldn't contain himself any longer, as he was always direct. He questioned Cindy about the talk regarding him flirting with a waitress, expressing his dislike for such games. Cindy responded by saying she wasn't certain about the exact details, but that it supposedly occurred sometime last week. Jim remarked sarcastically about the vagueness of the information. Cindy then suggested that Jim might have a better understanding of the situation than she did, questioning if he flirts with every waitress. Surprised, Jim interjected, asking if he was told he kissed them. Cindy confirmed this, leading Jim to assert that there were only two possibilities. Either it was a mix-up or someone was feeding her lies, as he had only kissed Cindy since they started dating. Cindy gazed into his eyes. Though she usually felt she could gauge his honesty through his gaze, she wasn't entirely sure, as he had never lied to her as far as she knew. "Why would someone claim they saw you kissing a waitress if it wasn't true?" "Beats me," he shrugged, taking another bite from his burger. "Since she's your friend, ask her." "How do you know it's a woman?" "It better be a woman. If a male friend told you he saw me kissing a waitress, then you've got your answer." Initially, Cindy entertained the thought that he might have seen her friend in the restaurant and kissed the waitress anyway, disregarding the potential consequences. But she wasn't sure what he meant by his last statement. "What do you mean? If it's a man, I've answered my own question." "Simple. If it is a man, he's into you and trying to stir up trouble between us. He's probably hoping to cozy up to you by playing the supportive friend." "That's absurd." "Is it? Think about it. Was it a man?" "No." "All right, then we're back to square one. You'll have to ask your friend why she's misleading you." An uneasy silence followed as they both finished their lunches. When they were done, Jim had a few parting words. "This is Jenny's birthday party, and I won't let it be spoiled by a fight with your friend. So if you keep cozying up to him like you have been, I'll just leave you here and you can find your own way home. Or you can spend the night with Mr. Muscles, but then you won't have a home to come back to. Understand?" She was taken aback by his intensity. "Jim, calm down. I'm not going home with Bob. I wasn't even considering it. I was just trying to show you what it feels like to have your spouse flirting with someone else, that's all." "Well, now you've shown me, so let's end it here." He stood, took his wife's paper plate and empty beer bottle, and walked over to dispose of them. As he turned back, he was relieved to see his wife right by his side. Bob, however, was displeased. He had been sneaking glances at the two of them talking while he sat alone, eating his chicken patty. He had no doubt Cindy was genuinely interested. She was eager for action. However, he also acknowledged the need for discretion. Earlier, he had hoped for an opportunity to slip away with her, perhaps to an upstairs bedroom or his car, but now such plans were off the table. They were being watched. He'd have to postpone indulging his desires, at least for now. Despite their underlying tensions, Jim and Cindy were determined to enjoy the rest of the party. She stuck close to him for the remainder of the day, occasionally drifting off to chat with friends, but always returning to his side. The only other interaction Cindy had with Bob was during the group rendition of Happy Birthday, when everyone gathered around Jenny's cake. Bob took advantage of the moment to sidle up beside her and discreetly touch her backside while everyone sang. Initially, she assumed it was Jim, but when she glanced over, she saw Bob wearing a smug grin on his face. She was stunned by his audacity. Glancing around quickly to check for any observers, she found everyone focused on Jenny. Normally, she would have reacted by slapping him, but she knew it would only stir up trouble, something she desperately wanted to avoid. Besides, she realized it was partly her own fault for encouraging him. If given the chance, she'd apologize to him and make it clear she wasn't interested. He withdrew his hand to join the applause as the birthday girl effortlessly blew out the candles. Jim glanced over when he heard Bob's voice nearby, but saw nothing significant. Certainly, Cindy wasn't about to confess to Jim about Bob's inappropriate behavior during Happy Birthday. Naturally, Bob interpreted her silence as consent. He knew how to manipulate the situation. She had to stay close to her husband to avoid suspicion, but eventually she would need to slip away to use the restroom indoors. Hopefully, he could catch her alone to arrange a meeting. He'd keep a discreet watch. For those aware of the earlier incident, the perceived threat seemed to have passed. Much to their relief, both Bob and Cindy seemed to be on their best behavior, so, with the possible exception of Jim, they all relaxed and let down their guard. Jim, however, had encountered guys like Bob before, men who thought they were irresistible to women, and knew they were rarely dissuaded easily. Just to be cautious, he resolved to continue keeping an eye on the potential troublemaker. The party kicked into high gear after dinner. Tony turned up the outdoor speakers and played background music from Pandora while games were set up. A dartboard was placed on the large oak tree near the shed, and Jenny's friends helped her set up the beanbag toss. Some women gathered card tables for bingo. Jenny and her friends suggested a best-of-3 beanbag game to her parents, Jim and Cindy. Tony warned them about Jenny's skill. Fortunately, the adults won the first game, but the subsequent victories went to the youngsters. After the game, Cindy kissed Jim on the cheek and informed him that she needed to use the restroom and would return shortly. Jim replied that he might challenge Adam to a game of darts. Cindy stopped to chat with friends on her way to the house and was fortunate to find the downstairs restroom unoccupied, so she slipped inside. Adam observed Bob's departure and muttered to himself about it, catching Jim's attention. Jim paused mid-throw and inquired about Adam's comment. Adam clarified that Bob seemed to be leaving without saying goodbye or expressing gratitude for the invitation. Jim turned around and caught a glimpse of Bob exiting through the gate, suggesting that Bob might be upset because Cindy wasn't paying him attention anymore and mentioning that he probably had plans with her. Adam agreed, noting that Bob was skilled at charming women, recounting instances where he had seen Bob leave a bar with attractive women. Jim turned back to the dartboard, taking careful aim, when a thought struck him. How would someone enter the house without being seen? They'd leave through the gate, circle around to the front, and enter that way. Handing the darts to Adam, Jim mentioned that he would be right back before making his way toward the back door. Cindy had finished her business and was touching up her makeup. Upon opening the bathroom door, she was stunned to find Bob standing there. Before she could react, he seized her shoulders and pinned her against the doorframe, forcefully locking their lips together in an instant. Had Jim been a split second later, he would have witnessed his wife forcefully pushing Bob away. However, in that moment, she hesitated as she tried to regain her senses. It was then that Jim caught sight of them. He grabbed Bob's shoulder, pulling him away from Cindy, and with a forceful blow to Bob's solar plexus, sent him stumbling back into the washroom, where he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. As Cindy's brain struggled to process the rapid events, she felt overwhelmed. It all happened so quickly. She turned to find her husband, but he was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, she searched in every direction, calling out for Jim, but he was nowhere in sight. Then she heard the sound of a car starting. Rushing to the front door, Cindy watched as their car backed out and drove off, realizing how the situation must have appeared, especially given her previous interactions with Bob. Ignoring Bob, who was still gasping for breath, she dashed out the back door. The first person she encountered was Adam, who was still waiting for Jim's return, unaware of the unfolding drama. "Adam, you have to drive me home, now!" she pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. Confused, Adam looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "Cindy, what happened? Where's Jim? He left. He caught Bob kissing me and—" "What? Is he hurt?" "No, Bob's still in the house. I'm not sure if he's hurt or not. Jim punched him really hard." Adam couldn't help but smirk. "Jim punched Bob?" Yeah. Please, Adam. I have to get home so I can explain what happened. He was so mad, I'm not sure what he's going to do. I'm afraid he's planning to leave me." "I doubt that, Cindy. He's upset, but I don't think he's that upset. You didn't see him just now." "Cindy, I was the first one here. I doubt I'll be able to get my car out. I'm sure I'm blocked in." "Please, Adam." "All right. Give me a second to tell Tony we're leaving, and I'll see if we can get out of here." After briefing Tony, Adam returned, confirming their predicament. "Cindy, you'll have to call a cab. I can't get out, but you can borrow my car." "Are you serious? Thank you." Grateful and relieved, Cindy hurriedly got into Adam's car, knowing she needed to reach Jim before it was too late. There was only about a foot of space between Adam's car and the garage door. He turned the wheel completely to the right and edged forward until his front bumper gently nudged the door. Then he reversed, turning the wheel the other way, until his rear bumper lightly touched the car behind him. He repeated this maneuver several times until he could back out onto his brother's meticulously kept front lawn, leaving only about 2 inches of clearance between his car and the one behind. Throughout the journey, Cindy remained silent, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of her husband's enraged expression from her mind. His fury was unlike anything she had seen before, and his physical reaction was unprecedented. As they approached her driveway, anxiety gripped her. She dreaded facing whatever awaited her at home. Soon, they turned into her driveway, with Adam parking behind Jim's car. Adam offered to accompany her inside, but she hesitated briefly before declining, expressing gratitude but insisting that she would handle the situation herself, since she felt responsible for it. Upon exiting the car, she signaled to Adam that she would manage and climbed the porch stairs, each step filled with apprehension. Entering the house, she prepared herself for what she might encounter. Jim was nowhere to be seen, and she worried he might be upstairs packing. Just as she began ascending the stairs to confront him, she heard the coffee grinder. A glimmer of hope flickered within her as she thought, "He's making coffee?" Jim, observing her silently from the kitchen doorway, broke the silence by asking if her lover had brought her home. Cindy clarified to Jim that Bob was not her lover, mentioning that the last time she saw him, he was still on the bathroom floor, struggling to catch his breath. Jim nodded in response but remained silent, which unsettled Cindy. She had expected some kind of reaction from him, whether it be anger or embarrassment. Since Jim seemed unwilling to speak, Cindy decided to take the initiative. "He caught me off guard, Jim. I wasn't willingly engaging with him. He ambushed me as soon as I opened the door, pushing me against it and kissing me. I didn't see you resisting him. You intervened before I had the chance. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what was happening, but you struck him before I could push him away." She still wasn't certain if her husband's behavior indicated genuine calmness or if it was merely the quiet before a storm. Throughout their conversation, he remained occupied with his tasks. She almost wished he would express his anger openly. His apparent indifference left her feeling anxious. "Well?" she prompted. "Well what?" he replied, hitting the start button on the coffee maker. "Jim, I've never seen you so angry before. I honestly expected you to be packing your bags when I got home." "Don't tempt me," he growled, his voice rising slightly. "You're damn right I'm angry. That stunt you pulled was immature and disrespectful. The only reason I'm not even more upset is because most people at the party knew what you were doing. But you know what infuriates me more than you making a spectacle of yourself? The fact that you chose to trust one of your shallow friends over me. Have I ever lied to you, huh?" His suppressed anger began to surface. "Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me or be jealous? No, never." She had never heard him refer to her friends as shallow before, but she chose not to address it. "Honey, I know how outgoing you are. I've witnessed it. You can strike up a friendship with anyone in minutes, even women. You may not realize it, but I've seen the way they look at you when you walk away. I know they'd be willing to drop their inhibitions in an instant." "Oh, that's ridiculous. You're making me sound like Brad Pitt or something." The situation was escalating. She needed to diffuse it before it escalated further. "Jim, all I'm saying is that you have a charming personality. People are drawn to you. I just want you to understand that some women interpret that as flirting. They might think you're available, married or not." She hoped she had eased the tension. "So, how does that justify you believing that I go around kissing waitresses and trusting your friend over your husband?" Damn, she thought. She had hoped to avoid that question. Their argument persisted for another 20 minutes without resolution, both refusing to yield on the fundamental issue of trust. Despite their disagreement, neither of them opted to sleep on the couch or in separate rooms, but Cindy sensed that closeness was out of the question. He wasn't in a forgiving mood, and she wasn't willing to degrade herself by attempting to change his mind. The following Tuesday, Jim met Tony for a drink after work. Jim was already seated and had just taken a sip from his beer when his friend arrived, wearing a wide grin. "Yo, Rocky, how's Adrian?" Tony quipped, attempting a Stallone impression. Jim glanced at his friend. "Isn't Rocky the one who talks like that?" "Yeah, but I can't pull off a Burgess Meredith impression, so you'll have to settle for what you get," he chuckled. Taking a seat beside Jim, he ordered a beer. "Seriously, how are things between you two?" "Right now, we're barely on speaking terms. I'm still angry, and she knows it, so she tends to avoid me."
"When are you going to cut her some slack? Most people at the party didn't even realize there was any tension between you two. After you left, some folks were asking about you and Cindy."
"What did you tell them?" I said something unexpected came up and you had to leave. Nobody questioned it. They probably assumed you two were eager to get home and, well, Tony chuckled. Yeah, well, we haven't exactly been eager to get in bed since the party. Speaking of which, what's the deal with Bob? Is he plotting revenge? I doubt it. Adam filled me in on what happened before he drove Cindy home. When I went inside, Bob was just getting back on his feet. He mentioned you landed a sucker punch. I sure did, Jim interjected. Well, he was talking about getting back at you, but I warned him to steer clear of you. I told him you're the toughest guy around and that I've seen you take down guys twice your size. I even threw in my favorite Bible quote. You have a favorite Bible quote? I didn't know that. Sure do. Yeah, though he walks through the valley of the shadow of pass away, he fears no evil, for he's the toughest and meanest SOB in the valley. That's you. Jim couldn't help but laugh. That's nonsense, and you know it, he retorted. Of course I know it, and you know it, but Bob doesn't. I think I scared him enough to make him think twice before messing with you. Well, I appreciate that, buddy. They both grinned and took another sip of their drinks. You know what really annoys me, Jim began, that she doesn't believe me about not kissing some waitress. Are you absolutely sure you didn't? Maybe just a peck on the cheek or something like that. No, He trailed off, and Tony could tell from his expression that he recalled something. You did kiss her, didn't you? No, she kissed me, Jim responded. Damn, I know what this is all about. The following day, Cindy was surprised to see Jim walking into her office at work. He immediately informed her that he was taking her to lunch before she could react. Assuming it was his way of apologizing, she expressed gratitude, but mentioned it was a bit early and asked if he could wait about 20 minutes. Jim reassured her, saying there was no need to wait. He had already spoken to her boss, explained the situation as a minor family emergency, and arranged for an extended lunch hour, which her boss agreed to. Jim urged her to come along, and Cindy, feeling apprehensive as she wasn't aware of any family emergencies, followed him to the car. As she got in, Jim held the door for her. She questioned him about their destination and the nature of the family emergency. He didn't directly answer her question, but instructed her to call her friend and get the name of the restaurant where the alleged incident occurred. When she asked why, he simply told her to trust him and mentioned that he believed he had figured something out. Reluctantly, she called her friend and obtained the restaurant's name, DeMars on Homan Avenue. He responded with a smile, commenting on the coincidence that they were headed exactly there. Cindy remained silent, but felt increasingly uneasy. She couldn't fathom why he would want to revisit the scene, except perhaps to confront her. Would he flirt with the waitress in front of her? She knew he wouldn't do that. She decided to wait and see what unfolded. The journey to the restaurant took nearly half an hour, during which Cindy agonized over numerous scenarios. She was almost in tears when they arrived. Jim placed his hand on her back and guided her inside. She knew trouble awaited her the moment they entered. Damn, she muttered quietly. Jim found a booth and had Cindy sit first, then joined her. Well, cuz, looks like you brought your better half today. Cindy blushed with embarrassment. Hi, Marilyn, she greeted their waitress. Hi, Cindy. How did you manage to get my cousin here for a real lunch? And with his wife, no less. Every time I see him, he's in such a hurry he can barely eat, she joked. Jim wasn't about to let Cindy off easily. Cindy seems to think you and I are having a passionate affair, he announced. Cindy waited for the punchline before responding. What? No, Marilyn, that's not true. Cindy turned to her husband. Jim, come on, I made a mistake. I apologize. She faced Marilyn again. A friend told me last week that he kissed a waitress here. I didn't even know you worked here. But we haven't... Last week, Jim interrupted. You gave me a peck on the cheek when I arrived. Oh gosh, Cindy, I didn't mean anything by it. Jim hadn't visited in a while, and it was just a friendly gesture. Marilyn, don't worry about it, Cindy assured her. I understand now. My friend misled me into thinking Jim had a thing with a waitress here. I'll be giving her a piece of my mind later. I'd like to hear that, Jim challenged. Cindy looked at him and accepted the challenge. All right, she said, retrieving her phone from her purse. Both Jim and Marilyn listened in on Cindy's side of the conversation. Hi, Linda. Not too good. You know that waitress who you said was kissing Jim? You know who that was? Jim's cousin? Yeah, his cousin. No, I didn't appreciate you telling me. You made it sound like he was having an affair or something. I don't care what you thought. I don't care if you think you see him screwing somebody in the middle of the floor. From now on, keep your gossip to yourself. Yeah, you too. She almost hurt her finger disconnecting. Jim had a hunch it was Linda stirring up trouble. She frequently made derogatory remarks about her own husband. Cindy was worked up after the call. "I truly apologize to both of you. Jim was right. I should have known better." "You have a few more apologies to make when you get home tonight," Jim reminded her. "You're going to apologize to Tony, Barbara, and Jenny." "What about Bob?" "You can tell Bob to take a hike. You don't pursue a married woman, no matter how much of a flirt she is." Marilyn was still standing nearby. "Who's Bob?" she asked. "Her boyfriend," Jim joked. "Boyfriend?" she questioned. "Don't listen to him, Marilyn. I made a mistake and he's not done rubbing my nose in it yet." "It sounds like you two had quite a weekend," Marilyn observed. "Let's just say I'm pretty sure Cindy learned a lesson about trust," Jim replied. Cindy was more than a little embarrassed. Her face flushed as she opened the menu. "So, Marilyn, what do you recommend?" Later, after dinner, Cindy spent almost an hour on the phone, apologizing to their friends, including Jenny. That night, they both lay undressed in bed. "Are you still mad?" "It depends." "On what?" "On whether you still think I would cheat on you." "I never really believed you'd cheat on me. I was worried you might give some woman the wrong impression. I just didn't want you leading her on." He considered her words and remembered how angry he felt watching her flirt with Bob. He'd never admit it, but he did understand her perspective a bit better now. Just as he was about to tell her he forgave her, he felt her hand slide down his body and start tickling his balls. "Come on, honey. You can't stay mad at me," she cooed. He decided he might not tell her he forgave her just yet. Her fingers gently wrapped around his manhood and slowly started stroking it up and down. Within seconds, he felt himself getting hard. Jim closed his eyes and let out a small sigh as her long red hair teased his skin. The loving touch of her lips sent shivers down his spine as she kissed the head of his fully engorged friend. "Oh, God," he groaned. She already knew she was forgiven, but Cindy wanted to take it to the limit. She swung one leg over his torso and guided him inside her. She closed her eyes as she leaned forward, resting her hands on his tight abs as she moved back and forth, driving him deeper and deeper. "Oh, babe, I'm not going to last long," he groaned. "Me either," she replied. Moments later, she threw her head back as her body stiffened. That was Jim's cue, and it was right on time as they both surrendered to an intense pleasure. A month later, Cindy and Barbara were having lunch together. "You and Jim seem to be getting along. Does he still flirt with waitresses?" "Not as much," Cindy replied. "He's still his friendly self, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that about him, but he does seem to pull back now and then." "That's all you really wanted, isn't it?" "Exactly." Barbara had to ask her next question, even though she thought she knew the answer. "So, have you heard from Bob lately?" "No, and I'm a little insulted, to tell you the truth. One punch and he just disappears, the wimp." They both laughed at that.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Fiancé secretly invited his ex to our wedding. Then I found out he had multiple fake accounts to stalk her. I, 23F, Clara, am getting married in January to my fiancé, Daniel, 25M. At least that was the plan until I uncovered something that's left me questioning everything. Daniel secretly invited his ex-situationship, Sophie, 22F, to our wedding without telling me. Daniel and I met on a dating app 2 years ago, just a few months after he ended things with Sophie. From the beginning, Daniel was upfront about his past. He said he and Sophie never officially dated or slept together, but admitted their connection was deeper than a typical friendship. They met through a mutual friend and quickly became close, exchanging gifts, love letters, and spending holidays together. Their situationship ended because, according to Daniel, Sophie wanted to focus on herself. But what makes this all so confusing is that he never seemed to truly let her go. Despite her blocking him everywhere except email after we started dating, he's kept her letters and gifts and occasionally brings her up in conversation. What I discovered recently has shaken me to my core. While reviewing our wedding guest list, I noticed Sophie's name. I thought it must have been a mistake since I hadn't approved it. But no, it wasn't a mistake. Daniel had sent her an invitation behind my back. When I confronted him, he shrugged it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that he just wanted her to see he was happy and doing well. He insisted he had no lingering feelings for her, but the secrecy of it all left me reeling. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. After all, Sophie is in a new relationship and even expecting her first child. Surely she wouldn't pose a threat to us, right? But deep down, the fact that Daniel went behind my back made me question whether he'd ever truly moved on from her. I decided to bring this up with a few close friends. Their reactions were eye-opening. One friend said, "He's probably not over her. She might be the one who got away for him. If I were you, I'd have a serious talk with him about this." Another bluntly said, "The fact that he didn't tell you means he cares more about her presence at the wedding than your comfort. That's a huge red flag." Hearing this made me feel both validated and terrified. I wanted to believe Daniel was committed to me, but his actions told a different story. Still unsure what to think, I reached out to Daniel's best friend, Alex, 24 million, hoping for clarity. Alex was hesitant at first, but eventually opened up about Daniel and Sophie's past. According to Alex, Sophie and Daniel met when she was just 17 and he was finishing college. They stayed friends for 2 years, during which time their feelings for each other grew. Daniel adored Sophie, but decided not to pursue an official relationship because she was still so young and focused on school. Their relationship was full of romantic gestures. Daniel wrote her letters, gave her expensive gifts, and took her on trips. Alex said everyone thought they'd end up together. But their connection hit a roadblock when Sophie decided she wanted to save herself for marriage. Daniel wasn't on the same page, and they ultimately parted ways. When Daniel and I started dating, Sophie found out and blocked him everywhere except email. Alex explained that Daniel had been heartbroken, but hoped that one day Sophie would come back to him. With this new information, I confronted Daniel again. I asked him outright if he still had feelings for Sophie. At first, he denied it, saying I was being insecure. But when I pressed him further, he broke down. Daniel admitted that he had never loved anyone the way he loved Sophie. He described their relationship as pure and innocent, and said it reminded him that not everything in life is about physical desire. Hearing this shattered me. When I asked why he invited Sophie to the wedding, his answer stunned me. He said he wanted her to see him happy, to realize what she'd lost. He claimed he needed closure, but something wasn't adding up. How did he even know Sophie was pregnant if she'd blocked him everywhere? That's when Daniel's story began to unravel. After some hesitation, he admitted he had been using fake social media accounts to stalk Sophie. My stomach turned as he confessed to creating over 5 accounts, complete with fake names, photos, and followers, to spy on her. He had been doing this for years, long before we got engaged. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I was about to marry had been obsessively monitoring another woman's life while pretending to love me. I told him I couldn't marry someone who was still emotionally attached to his past. My parents stepped in to help cancel the wedding, and I moved out of the apartment we shared. Daniel begged me to reconsider, claiming he loved me in a different but equally meaningful way. But his actions spoke louder than his words. His obsession with Sophie, his secrecy, and his entitlement to her attention were too much for me to ignore. A few days later, I decided to contact Sophie. I felt she needed to know about Daniel's fake accounts and obsessive behavior. We met at a cafe, and to my surprise, Sophie was kind and understanding. She apologized for any pain her connection to Daniel had caused me, though I assured her it wasn't her fault. Sophie shared her side of the story, and it was eye-opening. She admitted that Daniel had been her first love and that she had initially wanted to be with him. But over time, his constant pressure to become physical and his controlling tendencies made her uncomfortable. She broke things off and blocked him to move on with her life. When I told her about the fake accounts, Sophie was horrified. She hadn't realized how far Daniel had gone to keep tabs on her. She immediately made her social media private and even considered filing a report. This entire experience has been devastating, but it's also been a wake-up call. Love isn't about control, obsession, or living in the past. It's about trust and respect. I'm heartbroken, but I'm also relieved that I discovered the truth before it was too late. I deserve a partner who is fully committed to me, not someone who's still chasing a fantasy from their past. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to share. Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Liam Carter, a talented 35-year-old architect with a love for art and precision. Reserved yet kind, Liam puts his heart into everything he values, especially his marriage. His world crumbles when he discovers his wife's betrayal. Sophie Bennett, a 33-year-old marketing executive whose charisma and ambition mask her insecurities. Sophie's impulsive nature often leads her to make reckless decisions with devastating consequences. Aidan Miller, Sophie's colleague, a 38-year-old with a charming exterior but a selfish and manipulative core. Aidan thrives on power dynamics, often exploiting others for his gain. Emma Davis, Liam's college best friend and confidant. At 34, Emma is a fiercely loyal and empathetic individual who becomes a pillar of strength for Liam during his most challenging times. Liam Carter was always a man of routine. His mornings began with a steaming cup of coffee, a quick jog through the neighborhood park, and a kiss on Sophie's forehead before heading to his architecture firm. Sophie, his wife of 5 years, was his anchor and muse. To Liam, their life seemed picture-perfect. But over the past few months, Liam started noticing subtle changes. Sophie, once eager to spend their evenings talking or watching movies, had become distant. Her laughter seemed forced, her phone constantly in her hand, her screen tilted away from him. It started innocently. Late nights at work became more frequent. Big campaign deadlines, she'd explain, her voice filled with the excitement of her job. Liam, trusting her implicitly, offered his support. "You're amazing at what you do, Soph. I'm proud of you," he would say, kissing her on the cheek. One evening, Liam prepared a special dinner, a surprise to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. Sophie called 2 hours before dinner, her tone hurried. "I'm so sorry, Liam. Something came up at work. Rain check?" Liam's heart sank, but he brushed it off. Everyone had busy seasons at work, right? But then came the anonymous text. It was late at night, and Liam was reviewing plans for an upcoming project. His phone buzzed. "Your wife isn't as loyal as you think. Check her messages." His chest tightened. He stared at the message, his thoughts racing. Could this be a prank? A cruel joke? For hours he debated ignoring it, but something nagged at him. Sophie's increasing distance, her secretive behavior, it all suddenly clicked. When Sophie fell asleep that night, Liam hesitated before unlocking her phone. He felt guilty for invading her privacy, but curiosity and fear overpowered him. As he scrolled through her messages, his hands began to tremble. The texts weren't vague. They were explicit. Messages exchanged with a man named Aidan, filled with flirtatious words and photos. Liam's breath caught when he saw their last conversation. "Can't wait for our weekend getaway. Liam's so busy he won't even notice." For a moment, Liam froze. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He closed the phone, his heart pounding. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage crumbled in an instant. Scene 2. The Fallout. Liam confronted Sophie the following morning. The tension in the air was palpable as she entered the kitchen, humming to herself. He placed her phone on the counter. "Who's Aidan?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. Sophie's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Liam unlocked her phone and opened the messages. "This." He turned the screen toward her, his hand trembling. Sophie's face drained of color. Liam, she stammered, searching for an excuse. It's not what you think. Don't insult my intelligence, Sophie, Liam snapped, his voice cracking with hurt. You lied to me. You betrayed me. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything, Liam. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work. Don't you dare blame this on me, Liam interrupted, his anger boiling over. I've always supported you, always trusted you. And this is how you repay me? The argument escalated, raw emotions spilling out. Sophie tried to explain, to justify, but Liam couldn't hear it. By the end of the conversation, he made his decision. I can't do this, Liam said, his voice breaking. You chose him over us. I'm filing for divorce. Sophie collapsed into a chair, sobbing, but Liam walked away. He packed a small bag and left their home, the place that once held so many memories. Liam moved into a modest apartment, far from the suburban neighborhood where he and Sophie had built their life. He poured himself into work, using long hours to numb the pain. At night, though, the silence was deafening. He replayed their happiest moments, trying to reconcile the Sophie he loved with the one who, betrayed him. Emma Davis, his college best friend, stepped in as his lifeline. She'd always been there for him, but now her support was unwavering. You don't have to go through this alone, she said one night, bringing over Chinese takeout. I'm here whenever you need to talk or scream, whatever helps. Meanwhile, Sophie's relationship with Aiden seemed to flourish, or so it appeared on social media. Her posts painted a picture of a happy couple, cozy dinner dates, weekends at the beach, and romantic selfies. Liam couldn't help but check her profile, even though it tore him apart. But behind the scenes, Sophie's world was unraveling. Aiden wasn't the man she thought he was. His charm had given way to control. He monitored her every move, criticized her for the smallest things, and dismissed her feelings. At work, Sophie overheard colleagues whispering about Aiden's past relationships. He's done this before, one woman said. Gets involved with women, strings them along, then moves on when he's bored. Sophie tried to ignore the warnings, but cracks began to form in her relationship with Aiden. He became distant, spending more time on his phone, his attention shifting elsewhere. One evening, Sophie confronted him. Are you seeing someone else? She asked, her voice trembling. Aiden smirked. You're being paranoid, Sophie. Don't start acting desperate. The words cut deep. For the first time, Sophie felt the weight of her choices. She had destroyed her marriage for a man who didn't value her. It was a cold, rainy evening when Sophie stood outside Liam's apartment building, clutching an umbrella in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass door, a tired, regretful woman who barely recognized herself. She took a deep breath and pressed the buzzer. Liam's voice crackled through the intercom. Who is it? It's me, Sophie replied, her voice trembling. A long pause. Then the door buzzed open. Liam was waiting at his apartment door, his expression unreadable. He looked different, leaner, stronger, more composed. Sophie stepped inside, the warmth of his space contrasting sharply with the chill outside. What do you want, Sophie? Liam asked, his tone neutral but firm. I made a mistake, Liam, she said, setting the wine on the table. Her voice cracked. Aiden. He wasn't who I thought he was. He used me. And now he's gone. I realize now what I threw away. Liam crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. And you think coming here will fix that? Sophie's tears began to fall. I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I want you to know I'm sorry. I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since you left. Liam stared at her, his emotions swirling. Part of him wanted to lash out, to remind her of the sleepless nights and the betrayal that had torn his life apart. But another part of him, a calmer, wiser part, knew he didn't need to. He had already moved on in ways Sophie couldn't see. "I appreciate the apology," he said finally. "But Sophie, this isn't about me giving you another chance. This is about you facing the choices you made. I've worked too hard to rebuild my life to go back to where we were." Sophie's shoulders slumped. "I understand," she whispered. I hope someday you'll think of me without hating me." "I don't hate you," Liam replied softly. "But I can't let you back into my life either. Take care of yourself, Sophie." She nodded, her face etched with regret, and walked out of his apartment, leaving the wine behind. With Sophie out of his life for good, Liam felt an unexpected sense of peace. Her visit, while emotionally taxing, gave him the closure he didn't know he needed. Emma remained a constant source of support. Over the months, their bond grew stronger, and Liam found himself looking forward to their time together. One sunny afternoon, Emma invited him to an art exhibit in the city. "You've been cooped up in your office too long," she teased, dragging him along. As they wandered through the gallery, Liam felt a spark of inspiration reignite. The vibrant paintings and intricate sculptures reminded him of his own passion for art, one he had set aside for years. "I miss this," he said, admiring a piece. Emma smiled. "Then do it. You're so talented, Liam. Don't let this stay in the past." Her words stayed with him. That evening, Liam set up an old easel in his living room and began sketching. Hours flew by as he lost himself in the creative process, feeling a joy he hadn't experienced in years. A few weeks later, Emma joined him for dinner. Over a bottle of wine, she confessed something she had been holding back. "I didn't want to say this while you were healing," she began, her voice hesitant. "But I've always cared about you, Liam, more than just as a friend." Liam set his glass down, surprised, but not uncomfortable. He realized Emma had also deepened. "Emma, you've been my rock through everything," he said, smiling. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way." Their relationship blossomed naturally. Emma's kindness and understanding brought out the best in Liam, and he realized he had found someone who truly valued him. Months later, Liam received an unexpected email from Sophie. It wasn't an attempt to rekindle their relationship, but a heartfelt apology. "I wanted to thank you for letting me go that night," she wrote. "It forced me to confront myself and my actions. I'm working on being better, not for anyone else, but for me. I hope someday you can think of me without anger." Liam read the email twice, feeling a sense of finality. He replied with a brief but kind message, wishing her well. Later that week, he and Emma took a weekend trip to a quiet mountain retreat. They spent the days hiking, talking, and simply enjoying each other's presence. One evening, as they stood on a hilltop overlooking the valley, Liam turned to Emma. "Life has a funny way of teaching us what we truly need," he said, holding her hand. "I wouldn't be here without the pain I went through, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else now." Emma smiled. "Sometimes, the hardest chapters lead to the happiest endings." Liam kissed her, feeling a deep sense of contentment. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking back, only forward. Conclusion. Thank you for watching this emotional journey unfold. What did you think of Sophie's attempt to win Liam back? Would you have handled things the same way? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.
John Harkness valued honor, duty, and integrity. Growing up in a small town, he learned the importance of hard work while helping his father at the family auto repair shop. His father, a Korean War veteran, instilled in him a deep respect for service, which John carried throughout his life. After high school, John joined the Marines, quickly earning a reputation for toughness and leadership. John's life changed when he met Julie, a paralegal. They fell in love, married, and built a life based on love and trust. But when the Vietnam War started, John felt compelled to serve, despite being in the reserves. He volunteered for deployment, putting their plans to start a family on hold. Though Julie was supportive, it weighed heavily on both of them. Years later, John reflected on their 50-year journey together while getting a tattoo in her honor. Only the second one of his life. As both a mechanic and a Marine, John excelled. He believed reservists like him should help carry the burden of the Vietnam War, even though they weren't being called up due to the high number of draftees. In March 1967, after 3 years of marriage and buying a house, he discussed his decision to volunteer with Julie, who worked at a local law firm. While it was tough, they were financially stable, and John assured her they'd be fine. Julie, though tearful, understood John's strong sense of duty. At 6'6", John was tough, but marriage had softened his rougher edges. The night before he left, they shared an emotional goodbye. "Come back to me safe and sound," Julie said, "and remember, you're mine." John laughed. "Don't worry, honey. I'll take care of myself. Just behave while I'm gone." With a smile, she replied, "I promise to be good." Before leaving for Vietnam, John updated his will and arranged for part of his $240.60 monthly salary as an E4 to go toward their mortgage. Half of his pay covered the house, and a quarter went into their joint account for utilities. John figured he wouldn't need much and hoped hazard pay would cover any extra expenses. He did, however, get one indulgence before leaving, a tattoo of a knife with the words, "Death before dishonor." He considered getting a rose with a name, but remembered his father's advice and decided against it. In Vietnam, John was assigned as a fire team commander in a Marine battalion. Although the regular Marines were initially skeptical of him as a reservist, he quickly earned their respect in battle. Unlike some soldiers, John avoided the local women, not only because he was happily married, but also due to fear of diseases. "Come on, man, it's Vietnam," Harker, a fellow corporal, teased him. John showed him a picture of Julie. "Not with her waiting for me," he replied. Harker laughed. "Beautiful, but you know Jody's already with her," referring to the slang for men who seduced military wives. John shook his head. "Not Julie, she'd never do that." As the weeks passed, John wrote to Julie often and cherished her letters, reading them over and over. Her letters, which had initially come every 2 weeks, became less frequent. John didn't worry at first, thinking the delays were due to their unit's movements, but it seemed strange that he heard from his parents more often than from her. One day, John received photos of Julie in a swimsuit, but he didn't recognize the swimsuit or know who took the pictures. He brushed it off, focusing on the war and his duties. When Christmas passed with no word from Julie, John grew worried but pushed the thoughts aside. By January 1968, his unit was near Da Nang, where rumors of a major enemy offensive for Tet circulated. At the end of the month, the enemy attacked early in the morning and John's position was overrun. Most of his team, including Harker, were eliminated, and John was seriously wounded. He was evacuated to a naval hospital in Da Nang, then transferred to San Francisco. Doctors saved his leg, and though the bullet missed his vital organs, he faced a long recovery. His ear was permanently damaged, and a scar would remain on his cheek. A Marine officer awarded him a Purple Heart and informed him he was recommended for the Silver Star, adding to his other honors. Sadly, the only surviving member of his crew, Jennings, died from his wounds. John's parents met him in San Francisco, but Julie wasn't there. When John asked about her, his father, after some hesitation, revealed that they hadn't seen her in weeks. His father shared that he had last seen Julie about 2.5 months earlier when he spotted a man leaving John's house in a sports car while Julie waved from the doorway in a robe. Since then, she hadn't returned calls or been home. His father apologized, saying he had been collecting the mail and newspapers in her absence. John was devastated. He had been sure of Julie's faithfulness, but now Harker's warnings about Jody made sense. He finally understood why she had gone silent. "Was it a blue Corvette?" John asked. Bob nodded. "Yes, why?" "It belongs to Eric Swagman, a junior partner at her firm," John replied. "So she's not even home to get the mail?" "Doesn't seem like it," Bob said. "I noticed final notices for utilities in the phone, so I paid them. I figured you wouldn't want to come home to no power phone." "Thanks, Dad," John said. "I'll pay you back when I can." "Don't worry about it. Focus on getting better. I can issue a power of attorney if you want. If she hasn't been paying bills, who knows what else she's done. Maybe even emptied your accounts." John called over a nurse to arrange a meeting with a military lawyer. A naval lieutenant commander soon arrived, took notes, and prepared the necessary documents. "I'll handle the paperwork for you, Corporal," the officer said. "Your parents will get power of attorney. I recommend contacting a family lawyer as soon as possible. We'll meet this afternoon to sign everything." "Thank you, sir," John said. After the lawyer left, Bob reassured John. "Once we're home, I'll check the bank and stop by the house. I still have the key you gave me. If you want, I can ask George Williams. He's retired and now does private investigations. He owes me a few favors." "I don't know if I can afford a private investigator, Dad." "Don't worry about that. George and I go way back. I can also talk to our family lawyer. Oh, by the way, Wilkins said your spot is still open at the workshop. He's been saving part of your salary as a bonus for your return. Just don't tell him I told you." John appreciated Wilkins' gesture. Though rarely showing his softer side, Wilkins was kind and generous beneath his gruff exterior, always honest and fair with customers. "That sounds good, Dad," John said, wiping a tear. He silently cursed Julie. His parents hugged him. "Everything will be fine, son," his mother reassured him. "We'll handle it." A couple of hours later, the lawyer returned with a notary. After the documents were signed, John's parents left, promising to call with any updates. They thanked the nurse, who assured them John was in good hands and would soon be discharged to a VA hospital for physical therapy. Left alone, John finally slept. But his dreams weren't of Julie. He saw the Marines from his fire team, disfigured but sitting around a fire, talking as they used to. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring you with me," John said. Harker smiled, lighting a cigarette. "It's okay, Corporal. You did your best. Besides, there's no Charlie where we are now." Jennings nodded. "Parker's right. I'm just surprised any of us made it out of there." "Yeah," Johansson chimed in. "It was only 10,000 of them against the 4 of us, right?" Trujillo laughed. "I think we took down about 9,000 of them." The others laughed, but Harker grew serious. "You've got another battle ahead, brother. We all know it. And about Jody." "Yeah, I was kidding back then." "But you need to deal with him." The others grunted in agreement. "We may not be with you in person, but we're with you in spirit," Johansson added. "Thanks, guys," John said. "See you," Harker replied with a smile. John woke up in a sweat. The dream felt so real, especially Harker's words. He knew someone would pay, but he needed more information first. A few days later, John got a call from his father. "There's bad news, John," Bob said. "Julie drained both your checking and savings accounts, leaving just $5. She also withdrew $8,545 from her own account 2 months ago, all in cash. The only money that came in was your military pay, which she withdrew after each payday." "Okay, Dad," John replied. "You have power of attorney. Take her name off the account. We don't have credit cards, so that's one less thing to worry about." "I'll handle it. I also checked the house. It's a mess. Food is rotting, dishes are piled up, and it smells awful. She took everything except her wedding dress, our album, and her rings, which I found thrown in the bathroom trash." "At least the house is still standing," John said. "Yes, but the bed's filthy. I bet she brought her lover here." "What do you want to do?" "Get rid of it," John said. "Break it down and toss it. I'll sleep on a cot if I have to." "Will do," Bob agreed. "By the way, George offered to help for free. He said nothing's worse than stealing a soldier's wife while he's at war. I also found a lawyer who will handle your divorce at no charge. He can't stand Swagman. George suggests we change the locks, and I agree." "Yeah, go ahead with that," John said. "How are you holding up?" Bob asked. "I'm fine, really," John replied. "Who are you trying to convince, me or yourself?" Bob asked, knowing his son well. "Dad, you lost people in battle, right?" "Of course." John realized it was a foolish question. His father, a second lieutenant in the 1st Marine Regiment under Colonel Chesty Puller, had fought in the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in 1950. He knew all about combat, loss, and pass away. "Yes, son, I did," Bob replied. "Have you ever had dreams where they talk to you?" John asked. "Yeah, almost every night at first. They fade over time," Bob said. "Did you ever get over it?" "You never fully get over it. It becomes part of you. You learn to live with it or it will consume you," Bob answered. The next 2 weeks passed quickly for John. His parents called almost daily with updates on Julie. She had moved in with Eric Swagman and was pregnant by him. Their relationship was an open secret at work. John's lawyer, Mike McGregor, filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity and abandonment, along with a domestic violence suit against Eric. Mike also pursued legal action against Julie's employer for violating their moral code. and considered filing complaints with the state bar based on evidence George had gathered. Julie was furious when she found out she no longer had access to John's military paycheck account. She called John's parents in a rage, but they told her to ask Eric for money. She was also upset when her house keys didn't work, but they reminded her she no longer lived there. John found this amusing and focused on his physical and psychological therapy. Physically, John's wounds were healing, and he was learning to walk with a cane and crutch. Psychologically, he struggled with both the loss of his Marines and the betrayal by his wife. When his cast was removed, he asked the doctor about driving, and the doctor said he could, as long as it was an automatic. As John was wheeled back to his room, he noticed an orderly hanging up his uniform, now with sergeant's stripes. The doctor entered and explained, "You've been promoted, Sergeant, and you're discharged. You'll continue physical therapy at a VA near home, but don't put too much strain on your leg for now. Let's get you into your uniform, and we'll head to the break room." John found his freshly laundered uniform with corporal stripes still on it. After getting dressed, the nurse helped him with his boots, polished to a shine. Using a cane, John was led to his wheelchair and taken to the break room. To his surprise, his parents, doctors, nurses, and Lieutenant Colonel Arvin Johnson, his reserve battalion commander, were waiting. The colonel motioned for John to come forward. John surprised everyone by standing with his cane, and Lieutenant Colonel Johnson smiled, shaking his hand. He then read a promotion order, officially appointing John as a sergeant in the Marine Corps Reserves, adding, "And may God have mercy on your soul," which drew laughter. John's parents proudly removed his old stripes and attached the new ones. Then Lieutenant Colonel Johnson read another citation, presenting John with the Silver Star for his bravery during the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. On January 30th, 1968, Corporal Harkness had led his small team of Marines in battle against overwhelming enemy forces near Da Nang, continuing to fight despite being wounded and ordering his men to hold their ground. His leadership and courage had significantly contributed to the defense of Da Nang, earning him the Silver Star. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson placed the Silver Star medal on John's chest and shook his hand. "God bless you, son. Your experience will be valuable for training our men." John's mother hugged him, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she said. Bob wiped away a tear and shook John's hand. "Me too." After packing his belongings into a sea bag, John changed into his Class C uniform, khaki shirt and green pants. Marines couldn't wear green uniforms off base. He met his parents, and they headed to the airport. When they arrived home, John no longer saw it as a true home since Julie's betrayal, but he appreciated the privacy. His parents stocked the fridge with beer and snacks, and his mom made his favorite dishes, including lasagna. John changed into jeans and a t-shirt, unpacking his things. At the bottom of his sea bag, he found something he'd nearly forgotten, a large Bowie knife he had discovered in Vietnam. The worn scabbard had a winged creature holding a sword, with faint words that looked like March au Crève. Though unsure of its origin, John valued it as a souvenir and planned to learn more about it. Later, he called his lawyer and George to arrange a meeting at his home. He rested and then decided to check on his prized pickup truck. It was still in the garage and appeared in good shape. After checking the fluids, he managed to start it with some effort and let it run smoothly. He planned to change the oil and give it a tune-up soon. After looking around his property, John grabbed a beer and sat in a rocking chair. His leg hurt, so he relaxed with the TV on for background noise. Not recognizing most of the shows, he settled on a game show. Then, he called Wilkins to let him know he was back. "About time," Wilkins barked. "When can you start?" John explained his situation with Julie and his physical therapy. "Take all the time you need, son. Just glad you're home. These guys could use your expertise. Stop by this week. I've got a small return gift for you." "I'll be there," John said before hanging up. Later, Mike and George arrived. John greeted them, offered beers, and they sat in the living room. "Good to see you, John," George said. "Congrats on your award. You deserve it. Now, let's get down to business." He pulled out a reel-to-reel recorder. "I've been watching Julie and Eric. One night I followed them to a steakhouse, got a seat near them, and recorded their conversation." George played the tape. Eric's voice came through first. "So, Julie, have you thought about my proposal?" "I don't know, Eric. It's bad enough I cheated on John and am pregnant with your child. I just don't think I can convince him." "Come on, baby. If anyone can, it's you. He's probably desperate right now, willing to do anything to bring you home," Eric replied smugly. "You don't know John. He'll never agree to raise this child or share me with you," Julie said. No, we won't let him touch you. Look, I'm not cut out to be a dad. John would do a better job raising the kid. If he doesn't agree, we'll threaten him with divorce, take his house, half his income, and demand alimony and child support. I already have the documents ready, Eric said. George paused the tape. They seriously think you'd let that happen? John asked, shocked. There's more, George said, restarting the tape. I don't know, Eric. John won't go for this, Julie said again. He's so in love with you, he'll do anything, Eric said. Unless you still have feelings for him? I do, but not like before. Besides, you're better in bed, Julie replied. John blushed, feeling bitter about loving such a two-faced woman. I wouldn't have left you for Vietnam. What kind of fool does that? Eric sneered. John felt the urge to punch something. You're right, Julie agreed. I'll talk to him when he gets back. Good. Do you know when that will be? Eric asked. No, I haven't heard from him since January, and I haven't sent him anything since last year like you suggested, Julie said. If he's stubborn, we have other ways to push him, Eric hinted. Like what? Julie asked. Houses can burn down, brakes can fail, Eric said. You're not planning to hurt him, are you? Julie asked, worried. I won't support that. Don't worry, you won't be involved. If something happens, you get everything and you're free, Eric said. Only as a last resort, Julie agreed. Exactly. We'll see when he gets back, Eric replied. George turned off the tape. That's a conspiracy to commit liquidation, John said. George and Mike agreed, adding that it could also be conspiracy to commit fraud and theft, since Julie drained John's accounts. I filed court papers on my way here and expedited the hearing. There's also a protective order keeping them 100 feet away from you, your house, and your parents, Mike explained. I talked to the district attorney, and they're preparing a criminal case. I also spoke with a senior partner at their firm, who's outraged. We're filing a lawsuit against the firm for violating its moral code. By the end, Swagman might end up in jail. Your father and I have friends in the department, including the chief, George added. They'll keep an eye on you. Any questions? George asked. Yes, John replied. What should I ask for in the divorce? Mike handed John a folder. Your dad acted on your behalf, he said. We're filing for divorce on grounds of infidelity and abandonment. Since she earns more than you, there's no alimony. You keep the house and everything in it because she left and didn't pay the bills. We're also demanding $7,100 from her to cover half of the joint expenses, plus the return of her rings and a name change back to her maiden name. She keeps her clothes and car. We're suing Swagman for $800,000 and the firm for $2 million for not following their moral code. The firm might settle for half to avoid bad press. Mike added, One more thing. Do you have a dress uniform? Yes, John replied. Good. Get it dry cleaned and attach your medals. I want you to wear it in court so everyone sees who Julie and Eric betrayed. I have a surprise for them, but I'll reveal it later. Just let me know when, John said. Will do. Now I've got dinner waiting at home. Get some rest, Mike said. I think I'll go grab a beer and see if I run into any old friends, John replied. Be careful, George warned. This place has gotten a bit rougher. Not more than Da Nang, John said, and they all laughed. Not quite, George chuckled, but close. After George and Mike left, John went to his bedroom and changed shirts. He thought about the knife, grabbed it, and hoped to meet a friend who was knowledgeable about knives. He locked the house, walked to the garage, and started his truck. Damn, this feels good, he thought as the truck roared to life. He pulled out and headed to one of his old spots, stopping for gas on the way. He parked in front of the bar like usual and looked around. George was right. The area had become a bit more dangerous since he was last there. Damn, he thought. I've seen worse. He walked into the bar through a cloud of cigarette smoke. After grabbing a beer, he looked around, searching for familiar faces, but saw no one. The place where regulars like him once hung out for a chat over beer now seemed like a gathering spot for gangsters. He finished his beer and headed back to his truck. As he passed an alley, he thought he heard a woman screaming for help. He stopped and listened. The scream echoed through the alley. Please stop! A woman's voice cried. He heard laughter and swearing. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he spotted the source of the sounds. A young woman was surrounded by 5 or 6 skinny men. From where he stood, he could tell they would hurt her if no one stepped in. John reached into his truck and grabbed a tool for protection. He slid it into the back of his belt and crept toward the woman, leaving his cane behind, knowing he'd need both hands. As he got closer, he saw one of the men grab the woman's dress and tear it, exposing her body as she screamed. It was time to act. Hey! John shouted. "Leave the woman alone. Didn't you hear her? She said stop." The men froze and stared at John, unsure of what to make of the scarred white guy standing in their alley. One of them cautiously approached. "Or what?" he asked, pulling out a switchblade and flicking it open, assuming John would back down. John smiled and laughed. He reached back and pulled out his own knife, and the smaller man's eyes widened in fear. "You really want to do this?" he asked firmly, trying to defuse the situation. The man twisted his knife and tried to move around John, positioning himself between John and his buddies. John saw through the maneuver and countered, preventing the man from carrying out his plan. The gangster charged with his knife. John dodged, grabbed the man's wrist, and with a swift move, the knife fell from his hand as he cried out in pain. John quickly reacted, dodging the incoming attack, and with a swift movement, managed to disarm the man, sending him stumbling to the ground. The rest of the group, confused and shaken, began to back away. They'd never seen a knife that size, and they definitely hadn't seen anyone take down their friend like that, especially not a white guy. Most of them scattered, but 2 stayed behind to face John. Unfortunately, John didn't see or hear the man coming up from behind with a large wooden board, a nail sticking out of it. "Look out behind you!" the woman screamed. John turned just in time to see the board swing toward him, and everything went black as it punched the side of his head. He collapsed, bracing for another shot, but the man dropped the weapon and fled as red and blue lights flashed at the alley's entrance. John sat up slowly as a cop approached him. "Damn it, Harkness," the cop said. "Didn't George warn you this was a rough area?" "Yeah," John muttered, holding his head. "I guess I'm too stubborn to listen." The cop surveyed the scene and told his partner to call for a couple of ambulances. He grabbed 2 more pairs of handcuffs, went over to the men lying on the ground and cuffed them. Returning to John, he spotted the large knife beside him. "Now that's a knife," the officer said, picking it up. "Where'd you get this?" "I picked it up in Vietnam," John replied. "Hand it over," the officer said. "Got a case for it?" John pulled out the leather sheath and handed it to him. The officer examined it closely. "Foreign Legion. Seriously?" he asked. "Marines," John said. "Just got back." "I know you were in the Marines, John. I'm talking about the markings on the sheath. That symbol means French Foreign Legion, and the words under it mean march or die. This isn't standard issue. I bet it belonged to a French soldier once." He handed the knife back to John. "Better store this somewhere safe before a tough cop confiscates it. Maybe hang it up in a frame." John nodded. "Yeah, I'll do that." The woman, visibly shaken, approached the officer. "Please don't arrest him, officer," she said. "He saved my life. Those men were going to hurt me." The officer looked at her torn dress. "It's all right, ma'am. He's not under arrest, but he'll need to see a doctor, and we'll need your statement. I'll take him to the ER in my car and give my statement there. Is that okay?" she asked. The cop thought for a moment and then agreed. "All right, miss. You can follow me to the hospital," he said, calling over to his partner, who approached quickly. Another officer glanced at the handcuffed men on the ground and whistled. "Damn," he said. "Isn't this Juan Mendoza, the gang leader we've been hearing about?" The first cop nodded. "Yeah, that's him." "And this guy took out all 3 of them?" the second cop asked. The first cop nodded again. "Seems like it," he replied. "Damn," the second cop muttered. By then, 2 ambulances had arrived, and the paramedics were loading the gang members onto stretchers. The first cop helped John to his feet. "You didn't get enough of this stuff in Vietnam?" he asked with a grin. John laughed, though it hurt. "Apparently not," he said. "All I wanted was to have a beer with my friends." "Well, this young lady will take you to the ER. Hand over your keys. My partner will drive your truck home, and I'll pick him up after we're done at the hospital," the cop said, pointing at John. "And stay away from this place. It's not what it used to be. The regulars hang out at Rockwood on the other side of town now." "Thanks, officer. I'll keep that in mind," John said. He followed the young woman, who introduced herself as Amelia Simmons, to her small Dodge Dart. "Aren't you the guy who earned the Silver Star in Vietnam?" she asked on the way to the hospital. "Yeah," he replied. "How do you know about that?" "Who doesn't? It was all over the news today," she said. "But what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be home with your wife or something?" John couldn't hold back and started crying quietly. He didn't know what hurt more, Julie's betrayal or the fact that strangers seemed to care more about him than his own wife. "Sorry," Amelia said. "I didn't mean to upset you. What happened?" John gave her the short version of his marriage ending, and she began to cry too. She pulled into the ER parking lot, found a space, and hugged him. "That's awful," she said. "That woman doesn't deserve you." Tears streamed down her face. John looked at her and asked, "Why are you crying?" "Those men were going to hurt or even eliminate me. But you stepped in when you could have died. You don't even know me, yet you were willing to risk your life for me," she cried. "I can never repay you for that." John hugged her back. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "No, I do. I owe you everything. You saved my life even when you were already hurting. So I'll do the same for you. No matter how long it takes, I'll help heal your broken heart," she said. "I promise, no one will hurt you again. Not like she did." "You don't even know me," John said. "And you didn't know me either," she replied. "But after tonight, I know all I need to. John Harkness, you're my hero, my knight in shining armor. I want to take care of you, hold you, and fill the emptiness in your heart. Please let me." John considered her words. He looked into her eyes and saw only love, no deceit. There was a beauty in her he couldn't quite describe, perhaps because of all the pain from Julie. In the back of his mind, he heard Harker's voice. "Come on, Corporal." "Sorry, Sergeant." John smiled, though Amelia didn't know why. "Okay," he said, kissing her gently. She hugged him tightly. "You won't regret this, John, I promise," she said. They entered the emergency room where the officer was waiting while the doctor examined John and Amelia. The doctor cleaned John's cheek wound and took x-rays. After reviewing the images, he looked at John. "You must have a jaw made of steel," the doctor said. Amelia was fine as well. John gave his statement about the evening's events, and the officer seemed satisfied. "John," the cop said, "Amelia's a good girl, but she's had it rough. Her parents died in a car crash a few years back, and she's been on her own since. Her last boyfriend was abusive. She finally left him, but now she's homeless and has been living in her car for 3 days. I know you've got your own problems, but maybe you could help her out. Heck, maybe you both can help each other." "Thanks," John said. "Maybe you're right." John was taken aback by what the officer said. Amelia hadn't mentioned any of her struggles, yet she had been there comforting him. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Love, maybe. Whatever it was definitely better than anything Julie had given him. The officer handed him a card. "Call me if you need anything," he said before walking over to Amelia. "Follow me to John's house. I need to pick up my partner anyway," he said. She thanked him, and they left the ER. They drove to John's house in silence. John had a lot on his mind. His soon-to-be ex-wife had treated him like dirt. His fellow Marines were gone. And now there was Amelia. John didn't believe in coincidences, but he couldn't help but wonder. Both of them were in pain, but each had set their pain aside to help and comfort the other. They finally arrived at John's house, and after the officers left, he invited her inside. "It's okay, Amelia, I don't bite. It's way more comfortable here than in your car," he said. "I don't want to impose," she replied. John grabbed one of her bags from the car. "Nonsense," he said. "It's no imposition. I've got a spare room, and it's a lot safer than sleeping in your car at a rest stop." "Okay," she said. "You're probably right." Once Amelia's things were set up in the guest room, John invited her into the living room and offered her a cup of coffee. She accepted and settled on the couch. While making coffee for both of them, they swapped stories. John told Amelia about his marriage and time in Vietnam, and Amelia shared her life story. John learned that her parents were hardworking but had struggled financially. They died in a car accident while they were living in an apartment, leaving Amelia with nothing. She sold what little she had but ended up on the streets. The small savings her parents left behind went toward their final expenses. After losing her job as a secretary when her boss moved, she found work as a waitress at a diner near the alley where she was attacked. She earned just enough to share an apartment with a friend, but when her friend moved to another state, Amelia couldn't afford the rent alone. She dated a man briefly, but he became violent when she refused his advances. So she left and returned to sleeping in her car, hoping to save enough to rent a room. "Why don't you stay here?" John asked. "I can't take advantage of your kindness like that," she said. "I can't pay you anything, and it won't look good with your divorce going on." "It's no problem," John said. "You can stay in the spare room and maybe help me keep the place in order. As for the divorce, if anyone asks, I'll just say you were homeless, and I let you stay in exchange for help around the house." "That sounds fair," Amelia said. "I hope you don't get tired of me." John laughed. "I doubt it," he said. "I hope you can stand looking at this ugly face," he added, pointing to his scar. She gently ran her fingers over his scar and ear. "I can handle it," she said. "Actually, I think it makes you look tough, like someone who doesn't take crap from anyone," John chuckled. "Flattery will get you far. By the way, Things might get a little hectic here for the next couple of days, he said. Julie and her lover are getting their papers tomorrow morning, so I expect the phone will start ringing around 9 a.m. I also have some errands. Want to join me? Of course, she said. I've got a few days off. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted, and my leg is starting to hurt. I'm heading to bed, John said. I'll come with you if that's all right, she said, following him down the hallway. Do you mind if I sleep with you tonight? No, Zex, I just need someone to hold me. Of course, he replied. I promise to behave. She smiled and went to the bathroom to shower and change, while John got ready for bed. He was already under the covers when she returned, wearing a long t-shirt and underwear. She slid under the blanket and he instinctively wrapped his arms around her. She placed her hand on his chest and rested her head on his shoulder. She feels so good, John thought. They fell asleep and woke up the next morning with John still holding Amelia, his hand on her bare bosom. He quickly pulled away, startling her. Sorry, he said. Amelia smiled. They showered and got ready for the day. While Amelia prepared breakfast, John got dressed. At 9:20 a.m., the phone rang. What the hell is this, John? Julie yelled. I don't want a divorce. And what's all this about cheating and abandonment? I don't care what you want now. Julie, John replied. You moved out, refused to pay the bills, stole thousands, slept with Eric Swagman, moved in with him, and now you're pregnant with his baby or someone else's. That clear things up? I didn't know you were back, John, or I would have come to you, she said. Nonsense, Julie. It was all over the news. People I don't even know welcome me home. But not you. You were too busy cheating with your boyfriend to care about your husband, he said. You don't understand, John. I still love you, she cried. No, you don't, Julie. I haven't heard from you since last year. I found out everything from my parents when they visited me in the hospital after I got shot. You didn't even send me a card. How can you claim you love me when you're carrying someone else's child? But I love you, John, she insisted. No, you don't, Julie, he said sharply. What did you tell him when you talked about me raising your fool? How do you know what I said? She asked, crying. He had never spoken to her like this before. Do you really mean it? Just sign the damn papers and get it over with. We're done. And I'll take your boyfriend down with you. Suddenly, Eric picked up the phone. Listen, a-hole, I'll bury you, he threatened. I don't think so, idiot. Tougher men than you have tried and ended up 6 feet under. You want to go up against me? I'll bury you, and you'll be begging for mercy. I heard you planning to torch my house and mess with my truck. Try it, and I promise you, you'll regret it. You'll be lucky not to end up in prison, John replied. We'll see, Eric shot back. Julie got back on the phone. John, please, let's talk this through. There's no need for a divorce. Eric and I have a proposal for you, she said. If you want to talk to my lawyer, John responded. Here's my proposal. Go to hell and die. He hung up and punched the wall. Damn her, he yelled. Amelia came up and hugged him. It's okay, John. She had it coming. They both did. Let your lawyer handle this. That's why you pay him. Calm down, please, she said. How can she say she loves me after everything she's done? John asked. I don't know, John, Amelia replied. It's obvious she's not in her right mind. Come on, didn't you say we had things to do today? Let's get going. You're right, he said. What's first on the list? She asked. I need to visit my civilian boss, get my dress uniform dry cleaned, and have the medals pinned on it. Then, buy parts for the truck and do some maintenance, he replied. Let's get to it, she said. We've got a busy day. But first, I'll call my lawyer, John added. Amelia agreed, and John made the call, telling Mike about Julie's earlier call. Yeah, I figured she'd lose it, Mike said. And Swagman looked ready to break something. I'll be curious to see what they come up with. By the way, I talked to Lee. He's meeting with the senior partners and board this afternoon. Also, make sure your dress uniform is ready. Trial's next Friday. Got it. Thanks, Mike, John said. I'm taking care of it today. I'll call if anything else comes up. They left the house and dropped off John's uniform and medals at the cleaners, giving detailed instructions on how to handle them. The owner, an old military vet, knew exactly how to do it right. Then they headed to old Wilkins's shop. Hey, boss, John said as he and Amelia walked in. Wilkins glanced up from a stack of papers. Well, look who it is, Wilkins said. Damn, I need a secretary. I don't have time for all this paperwork. I've got cars to fix. John glanced at Amelia. Seriously, you need a secretary? Hell yeah, Wilkins said. I've got paperwork, phones to answer, and customers to deal with. I know someone who was a secretary and might be looking for a better job. Interested? John asked. Hell yes, Wilkins said. John took Amelia's hand. Boss, meet my friend, Amelia Simmons. She was a secretary, John said. Wilkins looked her over. "Think you can handle all this, young lady?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "Absolutely. I can type 50 words a minute, sort documents, take shorthand, work with customers, and even run the cash register." Wilkins considered her for a moment. "Are you working now?" he asked. "Yes, but I'm a waitress and not making much," she said. "Here's what I'll do. Give your boss 2 weeks' notice, then come work for me. I'll start you at $125 a week since you're John's friend. How's that sound?" Wilkins offered. "That sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins," she said, smiling. "You know anything about cars?" he asked. "Not as much as you, but my dad taught me a lot," she replied. "Even better," Wilkins said. "Oh, John, I've got something for you," Wilkins said, pulling out an envelope from his desk and handing it to John. "Consider it a welcome home bonus." John opened the envelope to find a check for $2,340. He shook Wilkins' hand. "Thanks, boss. This means a lot." "You've earned it. Deal with your cheating wife, then get back to work," Wilkins said, grinning. "It's on my list, boss," John replied with a smile. Wilkins waved them off. "You guys go." As they left the shop, Amelia looked at John in amazement. "Wow, $125 a week? I've never made that much. Thanks again, John." "You're welcome," John replied. "Did you know that's almost double what I make as a sergeant in the Corps?" "Really?" Amelia asked, surprised. "Oh yeah," John said. "So you really know about cars?" "Yes, my dad taught me how to tune cars, change belts and tires, and do oil changes. We didn't have much, so he fixed everything himself," she said. "Don't tell Wilkins that. He'll have you under every car in the shop," John joked. Amelia laughed. "I wouldn't mind getting some grease under my nails. You take care of the truck and I'll show you what I can do," she said, giving him a wink. John grinned. "Damn, girl, I think I'm in love." Amelia giggled and kissed him on the cheek. "Me too," she whispered. They stopped at John's bank, where he deposited the check and set aside 10% for savings as usual. He kept $100 in cash and ordered new checks, without Julie's name on them. Then, they went to the auto parts store to pick up everything John needed for the truck. After grabbing burgers, they headed home. Home, John thought. With Amelia by his side, it really felt like home. He parked the truck in the garage and started prepping for work while Amelia changed clothes. When she returned, she wore old jeans and a t-shirt. "So, what's the plan?" John asked. Amelia grabbed the spark plugs and wires. "I'll do the spark plugs and wires while you handle the oil," she said confidently. "Okay," John said, surprised. "You know how to check the spark plug gaps?" "You're kidding, right?" she replied, gathering the tools and getting to work. John was amazed at how smoothly she handled the tools. He worked on the oil change while she replaced the plugs, wires, rotor, and distributor cap. When he finished, he inspected her work, genuinely impressed. Everything looked perfect. Still, John knew looks could be deceiving, so he lowered the truck, climbed in, and started the engine. It hummed smoothly, just as he'd hoped. He revved the engine, listening for any issues, but there were none. Satisfied, he turned off the engine and looked at Amelia, now with oil smudges on her hands and face. In that moment, she looked more beautiful to him than Julie ever had. "Well?" she asked, a bit unsure. John took her face in his dirty hands and kissed her on the lips. "Now I know for sure I'm in love," he said. "You're hired." Amelia smiled, not caring that her face was even dirtier now. John handed her some hand cleaner. There had been a time when he wished Julie would share moments like this, but she always found his work too dirty. After cleaning up, Amelia cooked dinner, and they spent a quiet evening watching TV. For the first time in a long while, John felt content and didn't think about his soon-to-be ex-wife. The next few days passed quickly. John picked up his uniform from the dry cleaners and spent hours removing loose threads, polishing his boots, and shining his cap visor. Amelia handed in her resignation at the diner, only to be told she was fired on the spot. She left, knowing she'd have to return for her final paycheck in a few days. As the days went by, John and Amelia grew closer. They both agreed to wait until John's divorce was finalized before deepening their relationship. John found this difficult. It had been a long time since he'd been with a woman, but he was falling in love with Amelia and knew she felt the same. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. After breakfast, John showered, shaved, and dressed, then walked into the living room where Amelia was waiting in a beautiful dress. "Wow," she said, admiring him in his full dress uniform with his medals. "You look like you're ready to be devoured." John smiled. "Thanks, but I feel like a Christmas tree." "You look amazing too," he added. At the courthouse, they were greeted by 14 uniformed Marines from John's unit, including Lieutenant Colonel Johnson and Sergeant Major Roberts. After introductions, they went inside, where the Marines filled 2 rows of the courtroom. John joined his lawyer, Mike, at the table while his parents sat with the Marines. John glanced over at Julie and Eric at the other table. Julie's eyes widened at the sight of the man she had betrayed, while Eric smirked, resting his hand on Julie's pregnant belly. Julie hadn't noticed Amelia yet. The judge entered, and the bailiff instructed everyone to stand. Once seated, the judge noticed the Marines and asked, "What brings you here today, gentlemen?" Lieutenant Colonel Johnson stood. "Your Honor, we're here to support Sergeant Harkness and, if necessary, testify to his character." The judge nodded with a smile. "Thank you, Colonel. I don't think it'll be needed, but I appreciate the gesture." The Marines remained silent, glaring at Julie and Eric throughout the proceedings. As Mike predicted, the case went smoothly. The judge questioned both John and Julie about their marriage and the circumstances leading to the divorce. Julie admitted to leaving John, not paying bills, and becoming pregnant by Eric Swagman, who absurdly demanded child support from John. "Do you seriously expect me to order Mr. Harkness to pay child support for a child you fathered?" the judge asked incredulously. "Are you serious or just stupid?" Denied. Every request Swagman made was denied. In the end, the judge ruled in John's favor, granting him the house, issuing a permanent restraining order, denying child support, and ordering Julie to return half of the money she withdrew from their joint account. She was also instructed to revert to her maiden name. There was no need to return the wedding rings, as Julie had already discarded them. Swagman tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp rap of the gavel. "And as for you, Mr. Swagman," the judge added, pointing with his gavel, "I'm ordering an investigation into your role in all this. At a minimum, there's a serious conflict of interest here, and the district attorney is considering other charges, including conspiracy." Swagman's face reddened as the judge continued. "Your actions today will weigh heavily on any future proceedings. Mr. Harkness's divorce is granted." Swagman jumped up in a rage. "You fool! I'll have your ex and any other woman you're with, and I'll bury you." John stayed calm. "I don't think so," he replied quietly. Swagman looked around, his anger meeting the stern gazes of the Marines and John's steady indifference. Julie avoided his eyes, her head hung in shame. Before Swagman could say another word, the bailiff stepped in, placing a firm hand on his shoulder and guiding him back to his seat. John shook his head, as Swagman sat defeated. Lee Marcus, who had been watching from the back of the courtroom, approached. "You're fired," he told Swagman bluntly. "I'm also filing a formal complaint with the bar. Pack your things and leave by the end of the day." Swagman clenched his fists, but said nothing as Lee turned to Julie. "Julie, you're still employed, at least until you have the baby and recover. After that, we'll reevaluate your position." Julie nodded silently as Lee turned to John. "Sergeant, thank you for your service," Lee said, shaking John's hand. "On behalf of the firm and our board, I apologize for everything you've gone through." John nodded, his gaze still fixed on Julie. Lee then addressed Mike. "Given the situation and John's service, the board finds your original proposal acceptable. No need to prolong this or waste any more money. Let's finalize the details next week." Mike nodded. "Thanks, Lee. I'll call you Monday." As Lee left, John turned to Amelia, who had quietly observed everything. She embraced him tightly, and he took comfort in her presence. When they parted, John noticed Julie watching, tears in her eyes. "John, I'm so sorry," Julie said, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you." John's response was cold. "Well, you did." Julie wiped her eyes. "Why did it have to come to this?" "You weren't there, Julie. Eric was. You saw dollar signs and made your choices. Now you live with them," John said. Julie's voice was barely audible. "What's this about you raising my baby?" John's eyes narrowed. "Eric thought I'd raise your child while you stayed with him. It's ridiculous." "I didn't like the idea, but I considered it," Julie admitted. "I'm sorry." John just shook his head. Julie glanced at Amelia, realizing who she was. "I see you've moved on," she said bitterly. Amelia stepped forward. "I'm not just replacing you. I'm here to heal the heart you broke, and I intend to do that for the rest of my life." Julie looked down. "I guess I deserve that." John, his tone softer but still hurt, asked, "Can we ever be friends, Julie?" "I don't know. I don't deserve your forgiveness," she replied, eyes filled with regret. John sighed. "It'll take time. If it weren't for Amelia and my parents, I don't think I'd be here." Tears streamed down Julie's face as she left. John felt both sadness and relief as he watched her go. Turning to Mike, he shook his hand. "Thanks for everything, Mike. I owe you." Mike waved it off. "That's what friends are for. Besides, knocking Swagman down a peg was satisfying. Now go celebrate. You've earned it." After shaking hands with the Marines, John and Amelia left the courthouse. His parents were waiting, and his mother hugged him. "We're so proud of you, son," she said, then turned to Amelia. "Who's this lovely young lady?" John introduced Amelia, and his parents warmly welcomed her, inviting her to dinner. "We want to know the woman who makes our son so happy," his mother said. "I'd love that," Amelia replied. The following weeks were a turning point for John. His divorce finalized, he was free to move forward. He and Amelia grew closer, and one evening, after receiving the final decree, John proposed. Amelia said yes, and they were married soon after in a Marine sword ceremony. They continued working at Wilkins' shop, though they didn't need the money. When Wilkins passed away in 1980, he left the shop to John. John remained in the Marine Reserves, retiring as a staff sergeant in 1992, a year after returning from Operation Desert Storm. Though he still dreamed of his Vietnam comrades, John learned to cope, just like his father had. He and Amelia ran the shop until their retirement in 2008, passing it to their two sons. Life was peaceful until one evening, years later, when John spotted a tattoo design in a parlor window. It was a rose, similar to one he had seen in Vietnam, with space for a name. On a whim, John let Amelia into the shop. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I almost got this tattoo with Julie's name back in Vietnam. Now I want yours above my heart where it belongs," John said. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "But why?" "Because you healed my heart, and I want the world to know how much I love you," John replied. The tattoo artist looked at John skeptically. "You sure, old man?" John chuckled, taking off his shirt. "Absolutely." Amelia, still holding his hand, asked, "Won't it hurt?" "Yeah, like hell," John grinned. "But it'll be worth it." As the needle buzzed to life, John smiled, knowing the pain was nothing compared to the love he'd found.